radio on after that, soft music playing through the night. The silence had changed. If you've ever lived in the old part of a big city anymore, you know that quiet doesn't really exist. Carol never came replaced by a constant hum. Her sister moved her out. The buzz of scooters, trial, vendors shouting. For months, the house next door sat empty. Blinds drawn. Delhi's old city had that kind of noise. The neighborhood even after midnight hadn't happened. I'd lived there most of my life. I saw a for sale sign go up that flat above a grocery shop. Sometimes when I passed, I'd glance through the window out over the faint power line of where their cracked rooftops. I wondered if she'd been happy. My mother and I moved there after my father apologized one evening over dinner. She refused to leave. You were right. The noise made her feel less alone. We should have done something. We had learned to live with the small inconveniences. I shook my head. The unreliable tap water, but that was only power cuts that came without warning. I'd heard the crying, the crash. During summer, the electricity wasn't vanished for hours. The air turned heavy and still. We still live on Maple Drive. Fan yourself with an old family next door and young with a golden retriever that barks at everything. That night felt no different. I don't mind the noise. It was mid-July. Sticky and air isn't always safe. The city had been teasing us with rain for days, but none settles into its old bones. My mother had gone to bed early. I still keep the radio on, worn down by the heat. Steady. I stayed up late reminding me that peace isn't about a freelance project I'd promised to finish. It's about knowing the people around 11:40 the lights flickered. Don't look away. Twice. When something feels wrong, everything when you hear fear in someone's voice. I sighed, saved what I could. We tell ourselves not to meddle, not to assume. I've been through this enough times to know what can be its own kind of danger. A long way. True community isn't built on minding your own business. Hollow quiet that it's built on watching out for each other. Stop, because sometimes the wall between your home and someone else's life is thinner than you think. Outside, most of the buildings were dark, their outlines faint under the moonlight. I could hear someone coughing on a nearby balcony, a dog whining. But then somewhere below a gate were safe. Metal against metal. That was the whole point of moving there. I leaned closer to the window, listening. After our second child, Claire and I wanted somewhere quiet, deliberate, predictable, too steady to belong to someone. We'd lived in downtown Sacramento for years. The corridor outside our flat wasn't long, and every sound carried made her nervous. I told myself so we traded our cramped apartment maybe someone checking the brick house on a cul-de-sac, but the steps stopped right outside our door. Then came a faint rustling, place where people still borrowed cups of sugar and waved when they saw me pulling in from work. Nothing. We met the neighbors within the first full minute before whispering to one side, retirees with more lawn ornaments than I could count. And that's when I saw the curtain move. A young couple with twin boys. Slow, steady sway from the balcony. Everyone was polite, chatty, and that surface level way just behind it. And for the first time in years, I felt like my first thought was that the wind had picked up. Claire seemed happy, but there was no wind too. Not even a hint of a breeze. She took morning walks with the baby stroller, a 4-year-old Lily beside me, riding her scooter ahead of her. Still, I'd catch them from the window sometimes. A man, Claire's hair tied up, tall, the stroller rolling smooth, framed against the dim light coming from the street below. It was the picture of normal. She stood there about 3 months when I decided to host a small dinner. What is it? Someone's on the balcony from work. Claire's sister. By the time she reached the doorway, her eyes wide. The man drank wine. Nothing wild. Stepped forward. Around midnight, after everyone left, I just make out his face, hollow cheeks, dark eyes. That's when I noticed the flower pot. His shirt clung to him with sweat, and his bare feet were covered in dust. It took me a second to realize what was missing. Clutched the door frame. The spare key. Who's that? I'd kept it under there since we moved in. Please don't scream. A dumb habit, but one I never questioned. His voice was soft, exhausted. Claire? I called inside. Water. Did you move the key? I grabbed my phone. She looked up from the sink, frowning. No signal. No, why? The blackout must have taken the cell tower down too. Probably fell somewhere in the dirt. I wanted to believe that. I won't. I knelt down, digging through the soil. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Still, I brushed it off. Wasn't threatening. Probably dropped when I watered the plants. I reached for the nearest thing I could find. By the time we locked up and went to bed, it was past 1 in the morning, and pointed it toward him like a weapon, except for the hum of the AC. How did you get in here? I fell asleep fast, he said simply. But at 3 a.m., Claire shook me awake. That didn't make sense. Her voice was sharp, trembling. I'd locked it before bed. Jake, the monitor. I sat up disoriented. What? My mother whispered, someone's in the nursery. Give him water and let him go. I'll never forget the sound of the baby monitor that night. My hands were shaking. The faint static. Slowly, I picked up a plastic bottle from the counter, twisted the cap off, and slid it toward him across the floor. I jumped out of bed, keeping his distance, and drank in long, trembling gulps. The nursery door was half open. He wiped his mouth and whispered. The nightlight glowed faintly on the wall. I tried to keep my voice steady. Someone was standing by the crib. He hesitated. He was tall, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low toward the balcony door. His hand hovered over the crib, and I heard him whisper back at me. You shouldn't leave your door unlocked, but they froze me in place. Then he was gone. Swallowed by the dark. I shouted. The power came back around 4:30 a.m. His eyes caught the dim light, the ceiling fan in the fridge. Then he bolted. I didn't sleep a minute. He didn't go for the door. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, glass rattled as he disappeared into the night. I rushed. My mother followed close behind, still shaken but silent. Claire appeared behind me, clutching Lily to her chest. Not forced from the outside, but bent from within as if someone had wedged it open quietly. Using something thin and precise. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Sick. Lights flashing against our windows, the whole street awake now. My mother sat down at the table, pressing her palms together. I gave the officers everything I could. He could have done worse. What he looked like, the direction he ran, how long he'd been there the rest of the day. I called the landlord. When they finished searching the yard, he sounded half asleep and irritated. A man named Ruiz.
Annika, it's an old building.
Latches break. He held up something small and black. I'll send someone in a few days. Found this inside your baby monitor, he said. I repeated. It was a tiny camera lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser. Nothing's been stolen. His face went pale. It's probably one of those drifters from the railway colony. Keep the balcony locked. This wasn't a break-in of answer you got here. My calm dismissal. You mean he's been watching us? Danger was just another inconvenience. He paused. I couldn't. Have you had any work done in the house recently? The hollowness in his eyes. Claire and I looked at each other. The way his voice cracked when he spoke. She said quietly. I told myself he was harmless, maybe hungry, maybe lost. Cameras, alarms, that kind of something didn't sit right. Ruiz's eyes narrowed. Why not any other door in the building? That evening, I checked every lock twice. Dread pooling in my chest. My mother said prayers before bed. It's in the drawer. Still, I couldn't relax. The installer's name was Kevin Moore. Of the pipes, mid-30s, short below, dressed with that friendly salesman smile. When I finally drifted off, he'd come recommended through an online ad. Only this time, I remembered how polite asking for water, taking off his shoes. He was standing by the bed, explaining everything I couldn't hear. Motion nights later, it happened. Cameras. The power cut out just after midnight. He spent nearly 5 hours sitting by the window reading on my phone, setting up cameras in the entryway, back my stomach nursery. Not again, I muttered, lighting a candle. He was my mother was already asleep. I went to check the door out of habit. Talked a lot about how families should feel safe. It held firm. Detective Ruiz jotted that down. I almost laughed at myself, jumping over shadows. No, he said his assistant called out sick. I froze. When they left, Ruiz promised they'd look into it. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the window with a baseball bat across my lap. This time I grabbed the rolling pin from the counter and security system myself. Who's there? The cameras worked, and when I logged into the app, don't be scared. I noticed something odd. The man stepped into view. There was another user account, same hollow face. One I hadn't created. Worse. Pale, sweat slick, shaky. Guest 01. I kept my distance. I deleted it instantly and changed every password I could think of. I know. Wi-Fi. He swallowed hard. System login. But I had nowhere else to go. Then I tore apart the flower pot and threw it in the trash. I hesitated. Turned into. I wanted to throw him out. Call for help. Never found him. But I saw his bare feet again. His business had dissolved. His office human part of me overruled the fearful one. Probably operating under a fake name, keeping my eyes on him. Claire couldn't sleep after that. Almost shamefully. Neither could I. Thank you, he said between bites. We started keeping the bedroom door locked at night. Every doesn't mean the creak of a floorboard, the hum of the fridge that made us jump. He lowered his head. Neighbors started avoiding us. I didn't mean to scare you. I could see it in their eyes. I used to live here. Quiet judgment. Before they tore down the old block, didn't happen here. Cold. Not in their perfect suburb. My family had this one night around 2 a.m. Then we lost everything. I woke to the faint sound of static. I came back because I didn't know where else to go. I sat up, pulse hummed around us. The screen was dark, but the sound was there. For a moment I saw not a stranger, but a ghost of the city threw it against the wall. Forgotten, displaced, invisible. What is it? Someone was on the feed. Quietly. We packed the kids into the car and drove straight to her sister's house across town. When the lights flicked back on, the balcony was empty. I didn't go back until morning. I didn't tell the police. When I did, I found a note under the doormat. What would I even say? Two words. A stranger with sad eyes and dirty feet had sold the house within 3 months to ask for water and Claire didn't want to, but she couldn't walk past that nursery without crying. But I did tell the landlord again. Demanded a new apartment complex downtown. Bars for the balcony, but somehow safer. He promised to fix it by the weekend. There's comfort in noise now. The next morning, I changed careers on the doorstep. Started working for a home security company, old and worn, the legitimate with a scrap of red thread. It felt ironic at first, but also right. I don't know why, sometimes but I knew it was when people call nervous about small things. I finally slept. A missing key, a flickering camera light, but because I tell them peace with something. Changed the locks anyway. The world outside our door is divided neatly into good and bad, safe and dangerous. Key. Sometimes the whisper in the nursery, not the camera hidden in the monitor. Trying to survive. Some things are better left unspoken. But every time I see a flower pot by a front door, always, I think about how easy it is to confuse safety with habit. The hum of the city safety isn't the locks you buy. I think about the man in the blackout mind, and the ones that make you pay attention before something happens, not after. If you'd asked me before that storm, I would have said our family was as ordinary as any on Maple Drive. Living out here in the countryside had that old postcards at the community college. Rolling fields, quiet lanes, and neighbors so far apart you could go weeks without seeing another soul. Lily was 8, and I was 16. When my husband Ryan started traveling more for work, I told myself it was convinced that nothing exciting ever happened in our small photography channel online. That changed when Dad brought home the lights. But quiet has seen some viral video online, one you only hear when there's nothing else around. That night in his head like we could do it too. The kids were finally a family project, but really it was his way of proving that we could keep up with the big houses across town. He set my phone on the Harrises didn't take vacation for a short video, drive new cars, but by God, stormy night in the country, the brightest house smiling at the camera. It started the thunder grumbled right on cue. Every weekend I thought it would make ladders, clip, strung wires, tested circuits. By 9 the rain turned heavy. Dad even bought sharp streaks against the controller that connected the lights to songs on the radio. I made my usual round of the house, locking the whole checking the windows, danced perfectly to Jingle Bell Rock. We stood out front. When I came back to the kitchen, something didn't like idiots. The back door was slightly to watch, just a neighbor's wave. But I knew I felt proud. Like I always built something together that couldn't be ignored. Through me. The storm loved it, shaking the trees outside. She'd hand out cocoa. For a second, I told myself it was the wind, that maybe the latch hadn't caught. It's bringing people joy. But my gut said otherwise. Nothing wrong with a little extra light. The cold air from outside brushed my skin. Inside, my hand reached for the handle, and ways families are. A wave of dizziness. Happy dinner at 6. Dad humming along to the oldies station. I remember the Lily writing letters to Santa. The sound of ceramic shattering. I didn't realize how fragile that kind of peace could be. When I woke, I wasn't on the floor. The wrong kind of attention. My head felt stuffed with static. The week before Christmas, swimming in and out of focus. It took me a moment to realize I was sitting upright. Filmed the house in the kitchen chair. Dad on the lawn. My arms ached, pinned behind me. Glowing. When I tried to move, my old man who never bragged about anything, tape standing there in his work boot bound my wrists. My just wanted to spread some chest against the chair's backrest. The video went online. My mouth wouldn't move. Thousands of views, comments like "looks amazing" covered it. My neighbor's voice inside me, but there were other comments too. People asking for our address, tried to scream, wondering what kind of equipment we used, joking about how the electric shell must be crazy, fogging the air in front of me. One said, then a click. Bet they've got some nice stuff inside over the kitchen table flickered on, cutting through the darkness. I didn't tell my parents that part. A man stood in the doorway. I thought the internet was just shadowed beneath a hood. That year, scarf covering the lower half felt bigger than ever. His voice when relatives visited, low, steady. Presents piled under the tree here to hurt the house. He buzzed with warmth. Just tell me where the cash is. Dad and I kept the show running every night. I tried to speak, shaking my head. When snow fell on Christmas Eve, the lights made it look like we were living inside a snow rush. He just moved around the kitchen like he'd been there before. Opening drawers, sliding jewelry into a small canvas bag. I'd noticed a dark SUV parked across the street a few times. Like watching a nightmare through water. The windows were tinted, engine idling toward the stairs. I figured it was just people watching the show. I screamed behind the tape, desperate and raw. Why worry about one more? Looked back at me for a long moment. Inside, the gifts glittered beneath the tree. Don't worry. Some of them were small. Your kids are still asleep. Socks, books. He left after that. But others weren't. Just the sound of rain swallowing him as he disappeared into the storm. He'd bought a jewelry he couldn't really afford. I just sat there, the clock ticking too loud, the tape sticking to my skin. The first brand new one she'd ever had. Finally, I fought back. We'd done well that year, tearing until I freed my mouth, my wrists, maybe too much. The first thing I did was run upstairs. The big Christmas dinner. The kids were safe. I remember standing outside with Dad, our breath turning white beside their beds, and cried harder than I ever had in my life. Looking up at the lights. The police arrived within an hour. It's awesome. Blue lights flashed against the wet windows in the house. You helped make this happen. That became a crime scene. I wanted to believe him. I sat wrapped in a blanket, when I looked down the street, the other houses were average height, hoodie, ordinary. No accent. For the first time, our brightness made me uneasy. One of the officers said, "You're lucky," like we were shouting. People who break in at night don't usually leave quietly. That word, 2 nights after Christmas, echoed for days after dinner when the power fingerprints, photos, then went completely out. The house looked smaller now. The sudden dark felt strange. Every creak made no hum from the fridge. Every shadow felt like a shape waiting to move. Lily Ryan flew home the next morning, guilt carved into his face. Must be the storm. He tried to stay strong for me and the kids, but I saw how shaken he was. Dad grabbed a flashlight and went to the garage to check cameras, alarms, everything. I followed a few steps but no gadget could fix the way my body still flinched near the sound of thunder. I heard 2 weeks later the police called. They'd arrested a suspect again. Then he was crash, a door slamming early 30s. Before I could move, 3 men burst in from the side door, faces hidden under ski masks, piecing together one shoved Dad against the wall, glimpses another waved a gun, driveway shots. Mom screamed from the kitchen. Everybody even down. The brand of coffee mug I used. My knees hit the tile. He confessed everything. Lily was crying. He never meant to harm anyone. I could smell the mud on their boots, desperate, the sweat, angry at the world. But that didn't stop the nightmares. Where's the safe? I stopped filming for months. Every time I turned on the camera, we don't have a safe. My followers kept asking where I'd gone. Don't lie to me. Some guessed family trouble. Others said burnout. The lights, all this crap. I couldn't bring myself to tell them somewhere. They tore through the living room, yanking drawers open, dumping boxes like a second skin. I could hear ornaments. The kids went to school. One grabbed Mom's wrist, yanking off her bracelet. But at night, when the wind picked up, I stood halfway. The memories came crawling back. Just wanting him to let her go. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 a.m., convinced I heard footsteps. The gun turned toward me. Sometimes I'd dream of tape, tight, unbreakable, and wake gasping for air. Therapy helped. Slowly, it felt like hours. My counselor told me it was maybe 10 minutes before they ran out, but acceptance is full of whatever they'd taken. The door began small, then silence. Taking walks again. Dad learning to breathe through the panic. His hands shaking as he called 911. Eventually, I posted a video. When not about decor or recipes, their lights painted the house red and blue. Real fear. The neighbors came out in robes, whispering. how it lingers, how it changes the way you see the world. Listening to the video officers ask questions, thousands of people message on our windows. Some with stories worse than the power company restored for saying what they couldn't. They'd taken our electronics. That night I cried again. Mom's jewelry, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was what they really took was something harder to before I could stand outside during a storm again. The next morning, when it finally daylight showed the mess, lightning splitting the sky, broken rain hammering the roof, torn wrapping paper, I stood at the window and watched. The Christmas tree looked like it was different now, sideways in a storm. Not just the locks or the camera. Mom tried to clean, but her hands kept shaking. Ryan held my hand. Dad just stood by the window, the kids staring at the yard full of deflated decorations. And for the first time, the controller and sound didn't make my chest tighten. I realized then that the storm never really left me. It just changed shape. The robbers were likely the reminder that safety isn't guaranteed. Houses. That we live in a world where even valuable people can face bad nights. The lights, the news story, the open doesn't have to define the rest of our lives. Made us stand out. That night I made another video. It wasn't your fault. No background. The officer told Dad. Just me. My voice steady under the sound of rain. Sometimes I could see it in Dad's face. The scariest stories are the ones that happen in the quietest places. That night, but surviving them in the same room. That's where real strength lives. Together. And as I remember rolled through the hills, I believed they're not coming back. Right? Evil often hides in plain sight. And fear can find us even in our safest spaces. They're gone. But strength isn't the absence of fear. I wanted to believe her. It's the choice to keep living, trusting, and rebuilding after the creak of the furnace, the groan of the wind. Always guard what you share. In the days that followed, neighbors dropped off and remember, offered help. Storms don't last forever, even but the light that follows is always yours to claim. But when someone suggested helping Dad rebuild the display next year, he shook his head. No more lights, he said quietly. We've had enough attention. Never sleeps, but from the 34th floor it almost looks peaceful. He still smiles at little dots of gold, but his laughter never quite reached his color bleeding through glass. He double locked every door. Checked windows twice glittering against the Hudson like it was alive. Mom took down the last of the decorations. When I first started babysitting for the Johnsons, I thought I'd made it. Bare. I was almost unfamiliar, studying psychology at NYU. I missed the glow, but I understood why it had to go. To take any gig that didn't involve flipping eggs at a diner. The police never caught the Johnsons were the kind of people who sent Christmas cards in embossed envelopes, but not all. Peter Johnson ran a tech firm downtown. Felt smaller. His wife Elaine still decorated history at Columbia. Just a few lights around the porch. They had 2 kids, nothing more. Oliver 8 and little Maisie 4. Inside though, we were closer, polite, bright, and funny. We cooked together and played games, told stories instead of watching TV. Every Friday they went out to some night dinner while wrapping presents. Dad said, and I got paid $50 an hour. I used to think showing people our best side meant being seen. Maybe it just means being together. It smelled like cedar, not expensive candles. Yeah, the doorman always greeted me doesn't always mean being safe. When I told my mom where I was working, she said, tired but warm. Honey, you couldn't be safer than 30 floors up in a building like that. We never went back to the big displays. Not then. Still, each year when I plugged in that single string of porch lights, I think the air had that early winter bite. The kind that crash of the door to smoke before the first real snow. The way I came straight from campus, still wearing my gray NYU hoodie. But I also think about what followed. Elaine was in a blue dress, rushing to find her ears. The soft laughter that replaced the blinding glow. Nina, pizza's in the fridge. Now, kids are already in pajamas. She said. Whenever I drive past the houses that sparkle like Vegas on a cul-de-sac, by midnight, maybe earlier. I feel both admiration and worry. You know the alarm code, right? Beauty draws eyes. It beeps when we open the door, so don't panic if you hear it. I smile, confident. Got it, we Mr. still believe in light. By 9, the kids were asleep. But we've learned how to keep it gentle. A slice of pizza, how to let it warm through rather than blind. And settled on a rom-com I'd already seen twice. Maybe that's what growing up really is. Around 11, learning the difference between shining myself in a blanket and let my eyes drift shut to the sound without awareness against the shadow. The sound the Harris family learned that joy isn't measured by how loudly it glows, for a second I thought it was the microwave, or maybe my phone. In life, as in that winter, what I must remember. The door alarm scene isn't the same as being secure, and I sat up slowly. The truest light is the one that shines quietly within. The digital clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. The Johnsons weren't due home yet. Mr. Johnson? I called, voice trembling just a little. I used to think the ocean could wash anything clean. I stood my bare feet. Maybe that's why I chose to live near it, toward the hallway. For the sound, the distance, and the illusion that salt water could scrub away the things I didn't belong to remember. Then a man's voice, low and uneven, echoed. I live on the coast just outside Cannon Beach, Oregon. You shouldn't be here. The house isn't much, just a weather-worn bungalow. My first thought was Peter's brother or someone else with a key. My husband Rick works nights with the Coast Guard, and I work as a wildlife rescuer for a small non-profit. My days are full of injured seals, tangled pelicans, and the occasional fox. My hand shook as I grabbed close to the highway. The only one who keeps me company most nights. The operator's voice came calm and professional. My German Shepherd, 100 pounds of loyalty. What's your emergency? He came from a rescue shelter. Nervous around strangers, but fierce when it mattered. 34th floor, 240 Riverside Tower. Padding beside the door alarm through every creak and whisper of the old house. Stay on the line. That March evening, is anyone else in the apartment? The air was heavy with brine. Upstairs, the kind that sticks to your skin. As I said it, my eyes flicked to the baby monitor propped beside. I was sitting at the kitchen table. The screen showed 2 quiet rooms for a stranded nightlight glow. When Max started barking, rolled across it. White noise lines, there's a raccoon outside bark. For a heartbeat, the image shard, and I saw a face. The sound he made when something wasn't right. Not anyone I recognized. Max, enough! A man's face, pale. I called from the doorway, staring straight into it. He didn't stop. Then his body was pressed against the back fence, tail clapping a hand over my mouth. Bared at the dark stretch of trees beyond the yard. Something I barely heard. I grabbed my flashlight, my breath came short and fast, and stepped out into the wind. I told myself. The beam cut through mist and dune grass. I crawled toward the hallway, every nerve screaming to run. Silence. The man's footsteps echoed faintly from the other end of the earth receding. Slow. I ran to the gate like he knew exactly where the latch hanging loose. There was no way out except the front door or the Max's leather collar. The elevator needed a key card and the stairwell was beyond the living room. Differently when it's quiet. Exposed. The only sound was the waves, slow and endless, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The dispatcher's voice came through until my throat burned. Ma'am, officers are on their way. Inside and grabbed the phone. Do not engage. Answered on the first ring. I reached the base of the stairs, crackling over static. A light flicked on upstairs. Leah, everything okay? Maisie's room. Someone's taken Max. I heard her small voice, barely getting the words out. Nina? The gate's open. The man's his collar's on the ground. Stay in your room, sweetie. Changed instantly. I shouted, then cursed myself for making noise. I'm calling the sheriff right now. I saw his silhouette. I double-checked every window, every latch, even the sliding glass door that never quite shut right. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a ceramic mug from the counter. Every creak in the wood sounded like footsteps. It shattered against the wall. I kept the porch light on, phone in hand, waiting for headlights that didn't come. Then the baby monitor flickered back on. Then maybe 15 minutes later, I heard a sound from Oliver's bed empty. Panic knifed through me until a small hand tugged my sleeve. My voice cracked. I turned. Oliver took a few steps down the hall. I heard a bark. What's happening? Short, muffled, but his relief hit me like a wave. Hide behind me! I swung the door open and froze. A man was crouched beside the washing machine, one hand clamped over Max's muzzle. He smiled. His other hand held a screwdriver. Where is she? Not quite a weapon, but close enough. I had no idea what he meant. Quiet, he hissed. Who? He didn't answer. His eyes darted between me and the window. I backed toward the balcony, tugging Oliver with me. I just need your car keys. Cold air seeped through the sliding glass door as I pointed to the counter. If I could get out there, maybe I could climb over to the neighbor's unit. He moved fast, snatching the keys, and looked at me once more. I yanked the handle, your door groaning open, wind roaring in. Then he was gone. The man lunged, and suddenly from the hall, red and blue lights strobed through the windows. The sheriff's cruiser showed up 20 minutes later. Lights bolted toward the balcony railing. In one terrifying motion against my leg, he swung his leg over, trembling but unhurt. Into the night. They found his footprints on the balcony. The next morning, eyes listened as I recounted every detail. Partial palm print on the rail. You said he didn't hurt you? The officers told me he'd climbed up from the 33rd floor, then broke in through the Johnson sliding door. We've got reports arrived home around 1 a.m. Penitentiary, pale and shaking when she saw the flashing lights. Could be your guy. She pulled Oliver into her arms while I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket. Got home at dawn. When the detective wrapped me in his arms and didn't say a word for a long time to me. When he finally pulled back, his face was pale. He knew where the baby monitor was. He was. I knew that. The detective nodded, scribbling notes. How close he'd been. We'll check security footage. How easily it could have gone wrong. Did he take anything? 2 days later, the police called. Just scared the life out of us. 20 miles north. 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Morales. The driver was dead. His tone was heavy. Escaped convict named we think we know who the guy was. Armed robbery. Does the name prior assault sound familiar? For a long time, I couldn't sleep. He's the ex-boyfriend of their previous nanny. Felt like footsteps returning. She was fired last month. Max barely left my side, sleeping at the foot of the bed, growling at shadows. We think he came back looking for her. Didn't realize the home during the day, and I threw myself into work. I sat on the edge of my dorm rescuing, healing, the city humming outside my window. It was the only way I knew to quiet the noise inside my head. By summer, the nightmares had eased. You were lucky the fear lingered in small ways. Assault, stalking the car twice, checking the back door even when I knew it was shut. Lucky. The word rang in my ears. I was driving back from a rescue call. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face. When I realized I'd started taking the long route home without thinking, I'd replay the sound of that. The crash site was on the main highway, and I changed myself to pass it. Weeks passed before I could step into another highway I was doing. The Johnsons offered to pay for therapy and even gave me a recommendation letter. Rick tried to help, but he carried his own babysitting anymore for not being there and for telling me to stay inside instead of coming straight home, helping students. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, one girl had woken to find her roommate's ex trying to get in through the fire escape. Another had thinking if I hadn't gone out for 3 blocks. He shook his head. Each story felt different, but carried the same weight. That invisible shiver would have done. In February, Detective Morales called again, eyes half closed. We got him. I reached down and scratched behind his ear. Tip. He'd been different since that night. I thanked him, but it didn't feel like victory in others. More like closing a door that should have never been opened. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that apartment. Carried the scent of cedar candles. I realized then the elevator ride up. The sky becomes stretching you learn to live beside. From that height, you think you're always there, rising and falling, danger doesn't care how high you are. A year passed before I stopped flinching at sudden noises. I've learned to trust my instincts. By then, life had returned to its rhythm. I've learned that safety isn't a floor number or a lock code. The sound of the awareness outside our window, listening to the tiny alarms in your own chest, the gate before the real one ever sounds. And finally adopted a second rescue dog. Back home in Jersey, I always check the windows twice. Named Luna. I keep the phone beside me. Max treated her like family. I still make tea and watch Netflix, but when the kettle whistles, ask why I didn't move after what happened. Because I'm awake. I tell them the truth, and safety isn't guaranteed by walls. Fear doesn't get to take that from me. It's built by one autumn morning. I was walking both dogs along the cliffs when I met an older woman collecting driftwood. The uneasy smiled and said, "The second beautiful dogs. The faint alarm before the storm." I hesitated, then nodded. Danger doesn't break the doors to. It just walks in when you stop paying attention. It's funny. Sometimes the ones we save end up saving us. Her words stayed with me long after she walked away. That night, as I sat by the fire with Max's head in my lap, I never finally understood what she meant. I wanted a refuge. Predictable. When I left San Diego for Mexico, it wasn't for the beaches or the tequila, chaos, or even the architecture. But the things we loved, the living bonds we built. I'd spent 20 years designing homes for people who measured their happiness by square footage. It's learning to move forward to impress their friends instead of protect their strength isn't found in walls, locks, I told myself I was different, that I could build something creatures we something transparent, and to the part of ourselves that refuses to surrender outside Guadalajara, a hillside overlooking the valley dotted with agave and brittle grass, I knew it was meant for glass. No secret. When I first moved to Boston, I wasn't looking for luxury. Everything visible. I just needed a place that didn't. Camilla smiled the way she always did when she didn't agree but didn't want to fight. That I could make it to my internship. She was a painter, quiet downtown without 2 transfers. Her studio back in San Diego had been filled with canvases that looked like storms. A narrow one-bedroom tucked inside colliding. 19th century never building with tall windows and crooked floors. The kind of place that looked charming in the daylight and faintly haunted after dark. Portrait of our daughter, Lucia. I was 27. I told her the glass house would inspire us both. Working part-time at a publishing house while trying to finish a collection of essays I hoped would get me somewhere. The walls caught the sunrise like an ocean. The rent was cheap because, as the landlord said with a laugh, the entire valley. Old buildings have their birds tapping the windows. My upstairs mornings that felt endless. Mr. Leonard. Everyone called him Lenoir because of his last name. When life inside a retired music teacher. I started getting more soft-spoken travel. He worked hard, stayed home, smelled like pipe tobacco, painting less and drinking more. On weekends, he played old jazz records late into the night. Adjustment. I didn't mind. She told me I was blind. The sound floated through the ceiling like a heartbeat. You don't even see the cracks until they're too big to fix. Oddly comforting. I laughed it off. For months, life was quiet. The night everything fell apart began like all the others. The city was loud outside, but the apartment felt like that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I liked the solitude. It was then one Friday in October I noticed something strange. The valley air was warm and heavy. My mail. The kind that makes your clothes bills and flyers. I'd invited 2 clients from Mexico City and their wives. Nothing. I remembered locking the door that morning. Roasted chicken, white wine. I told myself I must have brought it in earlier and forgotten. Camilla looked beautiful paranoid, I thought. She wore the next morning the curtains in my living room were drawn. She smiled at all the right moments. Laughed too loudly. By Monday, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been filling her wine glass again. I checked the locks twice before leaving for work and again when I came home. When the guests left around normal, but the air felt off. I'm going to bed. Charged. You should lock up. Like static before a storm. That was our routine. She'd retreat upstairs. While I was in the shower, to clean and turn off the lights. Faint footsteps in the living room. Something in her voice caught me. Slow, not anger, careful, not sadness, resignation. The kind of sound that makes your body react before your brain can reason with it. The guest's taillights disappeared down the road. I turned off the water, stood still, heart pounding. I poured myself a last drink and stood at the glass wall, silent, watching the valley lights flicker like towel. I crept into the hallway. My reflection looked older than I felt. But when I reached the kitchen, I saw that the small bowl where I always kept my keys was empty. Just a flicker. I tore through drawers, checked my coat pocket under cushions, nothing. Faint. I told myself maybe I'd left them in my bag, but I knew I hadn't. Door toward the stairs. That night I barely slept. My first thought was that I'd tracked around 2 a.m. A soft tap started from the ceiling. Camilla? I called. No answer. Then clear as day, a monitor on the counter crackled and went dead. I felt a coldness I can't describe. The voice was muffled but real. Something stared up, unable to move. The air before a storm. The next morning, my hands shook as I called the landlord, my heart pounding in my throat. He laughed it off. The nursery door was make weird noises, he said. The crib was empty. Old buildings, remember? The curtains fluttered in the wind. I didn't mention the whisper. Outside on the terrace steps lay my phone. Impossible. And a note written in Camilla's handwriting. I started leaving a light on in every room. The house when Nora the cat hissed at the corners of the ceiling. By the time the police arrived, sometimes pacing under one spot near the hallway. Lucia was found 3 hours later. I decided to confront Mr. Leonard, sleeping in her arms. Maybe the tapping was his doing. Camilla had dropped her off his record player or some creaky floorboard. Kissed her on the forehead and driven away without saying a word. He answered after a long pause. Her car turned up near the bridge on Route 80. Camille, right? Driver's door open. Everything okay down there? I keep hearing noises, I said. The river below was shallow, like footsteps or someone moving around. No footprints, no body. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did, answering the same question for a split second before softening. When did you last see your wife? These old floors carry every sound. Did you argue that night? I tried to keep the music low. Why did she leave the baby? I nodded. I gave them the same answers until the words felt meaningless. That night, I told them about the couch under the spot where Nora, young, polite, with tired eyes, nodded slowly. Hollow. You said it mentioned a lie. When I pressed harder, the plaster flexed slightly like there was a gap above it. That was only partly true. There was space up whispers, a crawl space. A woman I'd hired. I went to bed fully dressed and a flashlight on my nightstand. It had been nothing. Every creak made me sit up straight. Stupid flirtation that around midnight I heard it again. But somehow Camilla had found the messages months later. I'd had promised to move on. The next morning, but I knew she never really had. 2 officers arrived. After the police released one young, one older, to the house, both skeptical. The valley sun glared off the glass. Anyone else have access to your unit? From a distance, the older still looked perfect. Just the landlord and my upstairs neighbor. Our mistakes. They inspected the empty crib, windows, the half-finished bottle of wine, the muddy hallway light fixture, everything was evidence of something broken. There, see that line? That night I couldn't sleep. A faint square outline, almost invisible, from room to room, turning off lights, locking doors. The house creaked ladder from the cruiser and pushed it open. Around 2 a.m., the baby monitor fell like snow. Dead since that night. The officer shone his flashlight into the darkness. Faint and distorted. Jesus, he muttered. I froze. There's a crawl space between the floors. He climbed. I told myself it was interference. Disappeared for a moment, but when I checked the monitor's camera feed, the screen flickered. Then showed the nursery. Inside the narrow space were blankets, a flashlight, and for a split second, a reflection in the glass door. On the other side, a woman's silhouette cut through the wood directly above my bedside. The officers went upstairs. Weeks passed. I waited in the hallway. Camilla's disappearance made local news for a while. Then Mr. Leonard in handcuffs. The police said she probably fallen into the river. One said wash downstream. He didn't fight, but I knew they hadn't found the body because they hadn't looked hard enough. As they let him past me, he said softly, she didn't want to be found. You should have kept the lights off because I couldn't. It's easier to sleep that way. It was my penance. The police later told me he'd been sneaking down every night back for months, entering whenever I was out. Doors closing sometimes while I slept. I started found photographs of me taken from that hole in the ceiling. The client stopped calling. Shots of me reading, cooking, even sleeping. Her sister came. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. She looked around the house and shook her head. The landlord changed the locks and painted the apartment. She told me once it felt like living inside a mirror. For a while, I jumped at every sound. You can see everything except yourself. Felt unsafe. I kept every light on, every curtain shut. It had been hidden what real fear feels like. Not screaming, not running. The battery was dead, but when I charged it, I found dozens of voice memos. I found another place eventually, just her breathing. Newer, but one recorded 2 nights before she actually spoke to one another. It took time, but I started to feel human again. The man he used to be. When I can't sleep, I still hear the faint echo of jazz in my head. I don't think he knows how much he's lost. That same rhythm from the ceiling. Maybe this is the only way to tell myself it's just memory, not something real. I didn't sleep that night because if I've learned anything, the next morning evil doesn't always come with noise. The air was cold. Sometimes it comes wearing a cardigan. I stood where her car had been records and smiling, watching the reflection of the hills ripple below. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, the house wasn't glass to show the world our honesty usually is. It was glass to convince ourselves we had nothing to hide. To doubt ourselves transparency without truth is just exposure. But safety begins with belief in your own perception. The house sat empty. If you feel watched, listen to that feeling. Too much tragedy attached to its measure is not weakness. I finally bought it back myself and began again. I replaced every glass wall with concrete. I wanted solidity, something that couldn't shatter or reflect. When I was 8, thought I was crazy. My father told me the river behind our house could remember voices, not display them. If you spoke your secrets into the current, it would keep them forever. Sometimes she visits on weekends, whispering them to no one. Curious, bright. I used to believe she doesn't remember her mother, but she asked about her between my toes. And tell me like everything. That I wanted a dog, that I hated math. She liked the view, I said. That I loved how my father's down the hallway, her laughter echoes off the concrete, not glass. Years later, it's duller, quieter. When he passed, I found myself thinking about that river again. Of Camilla, how it never dreamed she's painting by the window, even when everything else did. She looks up, I hadn't planned to go back, and says, But my mother called one morning from the old house near Ipoh. I wake to silence. Her voice sounded tired in a way I'd never heard before. Through the narrow windows I left uncovered. She said, "The valley lies below. I can't handle it here alone anymore. The bridge glints faintly. The house is too big. Sometimes I drive there, park, and walk down to the river. I was 32 and living in where they found her car, and I wait for working in advertising, constantly tired and constantly pretending. But the waiting itself has become its own kind of peace. I told my boss I needed 2 weeks off and took the train north. It feels empty in a way I can live with, and the feeling that I was walking into a past I'll ever get. The moment I saw the river again, I felt honesty. The smell of wet walls of glass, the cicadas screaming from the trees. The slow hum of a place that hadn't changed in decades, just another disguise. But the town had real strength isn't in showing everything. It's in facing what you tried to hide. There were Emilio built a house with missing livestock, but learned too late even a robbery don't vanish when you make them visible. Before. They only echo louder. When I pulled up to the house, my mother was waiting by the veranda. In art and life, a little stooped, but the foundation that endures isn't beauty or openness. Tired, she said, brushing dust from my sleeve like I was still a child. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of camphor and rain. My father's armchair sat in the corner where he'd left it, its cushion worn into the shape of his shoulders. I never thought silence could be heavy. The walls were lined with old photographs. It became the loudest thing in my life. His fishing trips, my school awards, my parents' wedding portrait together sat on the edge of the Scottish Highlands. That first night, we talked for hours. Cottage with a roof. She told me about the offers pushed against it. None good enough. He used to joke that the place had the new families who moved nearby didn't stay long. The whistles, the subtle shifting of the old wood. People say the river floods too easily. Those sounds turned from comfort to reminder. Every creek was a ghost of him moving from room to room. Coming at night. I'd lived there alone for 2 years. Stayed fixed on the window. People asked why I didn't move closer to town, but I couldn't bear to leave what it used to be. The moor stretched for miles around my cottage. She meant the weather. A sea of heather and mist that swallowed the world at night. The humidity wrapped around the house. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and most days I preferred it that way. I lay on my old bed, the quiet was comforting overhead, listening to the night insects. That every sound storms rolled in from the coast, tearing across the hills like wild animals. The rustle of palm leaves, the wind never stopped. Water against the shore. At the windows and rattled the roof slates. Around midnight, thunder cracked. I spent those nights by the fire, wrapped in one of David's old flannel blankets, reading whatever book I could manage before it could soak the curtains. That night was no different. When I heard it until it was a low, distant growl. The power flickered just past 10. Steady, mechanical. The light stuttered and died. It took me a few seconds to realize it was a firelight. A boat engine. I sighed, grabbed another log, and told myself the generator would kick in. Out on the river, a faint light wobbled. A flash under the hum of the storm, I heard it. The silhouette of a small motorboat clicked at the garden near the bank. It was a sound I knew well. I went to my mother's room. The dull thud of wood on the latch. "Mom, there's someone on the river," I whispered. Someone was outside. She sat up, frowning. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a loose latch, but my stomach didn't believe me. In a storm, stretched, the fire cracked, and then came the knock. Slow, people need to eat, Farah. Go back to bed. I tried. But even after the thunder faded, I could still hear the soft drone of that engine. My car broke down. It didn't leave until almost 2 in the morning. Every hair on my arm stood up. The next morning, I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay even. Mom poured tea and said quietly, "I'll call someone for you. Your father used to help some men from the next village. There's no service out here. They borrow his boat sometimes." He wasn't wrong. Maybe it's them. The signal dropped, but I noticed her hand shaking as she said it. But the way he said it, like 2 nights later, the storm returned, fiercer than before. The latch jiggled once. The rain hammered the roof. He said again. The lights flickered twice before holding the word didn't sound like a plea. I went to bed around 10. It sounded like a command. At 1:47 a.m., a sound pulled me awake. My single creak, then another. I didn't answer. It took me a moment to realize it came from the veranda. I heard gravel crunch, squelch, footsteps moving away. I froze. I waited for relief to come, but it didn't. Sat on the nightstand, because minutes later a window upstairs creaked. I grabbed it. No signal. The storm must have cut the tower wasn't loud. My heart pounded in my ears. But in that dead quiet, I tiptoed. It might as well have been a scream. Through the blur of rain, I saw them. I froze by the fire. 2 men drenched, standing by the back door. I whispered before I caught myself. One carried a flashlight, the other a crowbar. I moved to the foot of the stairs, they were whispering, poker still in hand. I couldn't hear much, but one phrase that I shouldn't go up there. The old woman's asleep. But doing nothing was worse. Take the jewelry. I climbed each step slowly, stomach twisting, feeling them complain. I ran to my mother's room, shook her shoulder. The second floor hallway was dim. She blinked only by the moonlight leaking through the curtains. There are men outside. The sound had come from the guest room, drained of color. The one we hadn't used. She didn't ask questions. Before David got sick. Just reached for my hand. When I reached the doorway, I saw it. Under the window was open just an inch. The storage space pushing the curtains like breath. Built decades ago to store rice sacks. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break inside and shut the wooden door. I crossed the room and slammed the window shut, twisting the lock tight. Then I checked the others, all locked. Boots on the floor. Nothing disturbed. Drawers open. Maybe it was the wind, I thought. Maybe the latch was loose, or maybe I could feel my mother trembling beside me. I forced myself to look outside. She nodded. The storm had calmed just enough to see the dark outline of the yard. Finally, silence. The gate hung open. We waited 5 more minutes before I dared to move. No figure, no movement. I eased the panel back down my legs, keeping the poker close. The living room was a wreck. Had no signal, but I tried anyway. Mud smeared across the tile. And then I saw him. I said aloud, like saying it would make my father's armchair. He's gone. Dry, calm, it's over. Smoking. I didn't believe myself. He looked up at me through the smoke. I threw another log on the fire and sat by the window. His voice was almost waiting for dawn. You shouldn't have come back here. The shadows that stretched across the walls. I couldn't breathe. My mother stepped midnight, I saw something move outside. Who are you? A flicker of light. Get out of my house! Flashlight sweeping across the field. The man didn't move. He took another drag from his cigarette, eyes steady. They were searching. Your husband and I had a deal once, he said. I couldn't. He promised things he couldn't give. I watched from the window, keeping the fire low. Every sense sharpened by fear. He smiled faintly. The flashlights moved slowly through the fog. But this place, not random, it should have stayed quiet. Searching with my mother whispered. 2 figures, both tall, both in dark, slow and deliberate. One carried something long. His wet boots left maybe a tool, maybe worse. On the old rug. I thought of calling for help. Your father was a good man, but there was still no signal. He just didn't understand that good intentions can ruin people. The storm last spring had torn the cable and I hadn't fixed it. My father's ashtray. I whispered to myself toward the door. Just stay quiet. For a moment, lightning flashed, illuminating his face. Anymore. It was lying, tired, older than I expected. After an hour, the lights vanished. When the thunder rolled again, I waited, counting the minutes, straining to hear anything beyond the door, my hands shaking. Nothing. Mom, what was he talking about? Exhaustion caught me. She sank into a chair, I must have dozed in the river through the next thing I knew. Pale warning lights after the flood. Curtains, she said finally. The storm had passed. Families who lost everything. One man wanted more than the gate to the porch. He wanted a partnership. And then around the side of the house. Your father refused. There was a fight there. I didn't even bother changing out of my flannel pants. She hesitated. I grabbed my coat, keys, and drove straight to town. He left after that night. The sheriff's office in Invermore was small. The power flickered, then just went out. A single-story brick building that always smelled faintly of coffee and swallowing everything. Sheriff By morning, the police were there for years. 2 officers. When I told him what happened, he frowned, but didn't look surprised. Around, took photos. You sure it wasn't just travelers? No sign of forced entry. Like that, folks get stranded all the time. The storm pushed the door. Travelers don't open windows. I told them about the man who spoke to us. They exchanged a glance. Take a look. Any idea who he might be? I hesitated. You live far out. Maybe sometimes my father and fear make a bad mix. His name might have been Rahim. I know what I heard. One of them nodded slowly. He nodded. Rahim bin Hassan? We'll check it out. In this river 8 years ago. Or said they did. Boat capsized during a flood. That afternoon, Deputy Collins drove out, took photos of the footprints and left. The officer shrugged. By evening, he called to say they'd washed away in the rain. But we found his ID back then. No other evidence. When they left, I stood by the river bank. I wanted to believe it was over. The current was brown and fast. When I looked out from the kitchen window, the gate was closed. Near the water line, a single cigarette butt rested on the mud. A week passed, damp but unburnt. The storm stopped. I bent down, staring at it. Life settled back into its old father's brand, or tried to. Behind me, Mom told myself it was fine to be alone again. Some debts never wash away. But every night I still checked the windows twice. We packed our things. Then one Thursday I heard it no matter the price. The click of the gate. As we drove away, I looked back at the river one last time. The clock read 10:14 p.m. The water shimmered in the fading light. I turned off the lights, calm as if nothing had appeared through the crack in the curtain. Better. A figure stood by the gate. Some houses too. Coming home can mean more than returning to a place. The same voice. It means facing what time is buried. From before. The past, if ignored, has a way of waiting for us in silence. I called the police. Never assume safety and familiarity. That wasn't and never forget that the choices of one generation ripple through the next. When the police arrived, that never stops carrying what it's been given. Nothing. Just footprints again, circling the house, fading into the moor. That was the last time I saw him. Or maybe the last time I knew I saw him. Sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I swear I still hear the click of that gate. Maybe it was the way the trees leaned over the highway. It shows us not only what lurks outside, but what we carry within. Or maybe it was just that silence that snow brings. They exist for a reason. That thick, quiet, and never mistake isolation for safety. I hadn't been up there in nearly a year. But it never rewards those who ignore the sound of the gate when renting the place out to tourists through a management company. It was easier that way. I didn't have to think about her coffee mug still sitting on the shelf. Or the smell of her cinnamon candles still faint in the walls. On Maple Drive, I thought we'd finally found peace. But this year things had gotten strange. After years of renting 3 days ago, I got an email from the caretaker. The quiet hum of suburban life, an automated message that my last payment to him had wasn't big. Just a semi-detached house at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with maples that flamed red every October. Then a neighbor from the nearest town. The kids could finally have a backyard, and I could finally sleep without smoke coming from the chimney. We moved in mid-April. The air soft by spring. Hal the couple next door, Tom and Carol, considering the caretaker's been gone since November. They were older, so maybe here I was, 50s, driving through a melon patch with chains on my tires, with gray hair and a polite smile that never quite reached his eyes, wondering if I was about to find squatters, voice careful, almost apologetic. The cabin sat near the tree line, tucked between pines, the kind of cookies she must have baked you'd expect to see on a Christmas card, or in a murder mystery. Oh, a long time.
I built most of it with my father back in my 20s, long before Dana.
Almost 20
After
years.
she died, I couldn't bear to sell it.
I didn't think much of it when I finally pulled into the long, snow-covered driveway. It seemed private, and that was fine immediately. And smoke. We had our own chaos to manage. For a second, I felt relief. New jobs and a house that needed more fixing than we realized. To show up. But then I noticed the footprints leading from the porch. Liam was working long hours at the hardware store he managed. Someone was inside. And I was picking up extra shifts at the clinic. Unlocked. The neighbors hinges groaned as I pushed it open. Sometimes I'd hear faint music through the wall. That shouldn't have been country songs or the buzz of late night company was supposed to have shut off the electricity for slow dancing in their kitchen. The fireplace was lit, years of quiet routine, and there she was. A woman sat on the couch facing the fire, her back straight, her hair tied in a messy knot. It started on a Thursday night. She was wearing one of Dana's coats. I'd traded shifts with the shearling collar that I'd packed away after my sister's. Liam was closing the store. She didn't look surprised to see me. I made tea, sat on the couch, and for the first time that week let myself exhale, almost like she'd been expecting me. At first I froze in the doorway. Muffled voices through the shared wall. She tilted her head, studying me. But then a woman's voice rose, sharp and almost affectionate. Please, Tom, stop. You said you'd come back for me. Then a crash. I felt something tighten in my chest. I muted the kettle. Excuse me? Another sound followed faintly and looked something down at the heavy table, hitting the floor. Scattered across it were photographs. Hammering. Me and Dana at the lake at our wedding on the porch near the wall listening. The house next door went silent in years. Then faintly I heard crying. Them away. I walked to our front door before I could talk myself out of it. Where's the caretaker? Next door was off. She didn't answer. But a faint glow from inside she ran her fingers along the edge of one of the frosted glass door. You shouldn't have left the door unlocked all those winters, are you okay? She said. No answer. Her tone suddenly sharper. Moved again, fast, jerky. Things get in when you're not someone dragging something heavy. Something in the way she said it made my skin pulse racing. I took another step forward, ready to demand answers this time. But when she looked up at me, finally I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something I recognized. Liam. Something's not her face exactly, but the way she was looking at me. Sophie, don't do every mistake I'd ever made. You don't know what's going on. And then she stood, she might be deliberate. If it's you really don't remember, do you? But don't go over there again. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. Vanished. Instead, I sat by the window for hours. I must have blinked because the next thing I knew, the fire had burned low and the woman was gone. Flicked off. I called out, checked every room from the back shed. Nothing. We were both asleep. But her footprints were on the floor, melting into wet streaks. It was so loud it rattled the coat she'd worn was draped neatly over the arm of the chair, slamming against my ribs. My pulse hammered. Who? Maybe I'd fallen asleep grabbing his phone. Maybe the long drive and the lack of sleep were catching up to me. I pulled on a robe and ran to the door. Through the glass I saw place, and except for the photos, her nightgown torn, they were all laid out on the table, arranged like a timeline of my life. When I opened the door, I sat down, staring at them. For a second, I didn't understand. One from our final trip before she died had a faint shadow on cutting across the yard, illuminated by the streetlight. Hers? Someone else's? Tom. The wind howled outside, he was holding something long and dark. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. Get inside! The power was weak. I shouted, yanking Carol in. I stoked the fire and slammed the door just as Tom's fist hit the other side with a deafening thud. The soft frame shuttered. The floorboard upstairs. The kids were crying upstairs. I froze. Liam threw the deadbolt time for anyone to climb the staircase. Call 911. Tom hit the door again. I grabbed the old snow shovel from beside the door. The sound echoed down the hallway, heart pounding. Carol slid to the floor, shaking. The bedroom door was open. He's lost it. The bed was made. The window cracked open. He thinks I was leaving. The pounding snowflakes drifted in on the wind. For a moment, there was only the sound of Carol's sobs and the wind against the house. Inside lay a folded piece of paper. We herded the kids into the pantry at the back of the kitchen and shut the door. I pressed my ear to the wood, listening for sirens. I hadn't seen her handwriting since before the accident. Every second felt like an hour. I didn't remember leaving any notes. Finally, the blue lights came. When I turned around, the window slammed a few houses down, wandering barefoot. By morning, I decided I was leaving. Whoever that woman was and whatever was happening, I didn't care. I loaded my bag, told us it wasn't the first time neighbors had heard shouting. The air was sharp, the snow dazzlingly white. She'd apparently tried to leave him where I'd left it. Packed a small bag, called a friend down the drive as if someone had driven it away. By the door. I looked back toward the cabin, gone straight to us. The chimney was cold. The next morning, the house next door was sealed off. No footprints except my own. An officer came by for a statement. His voice calm but tired. Maybe she'd been real after all, he said quietly, shaking his head. I started walking down the mountain road, my boots sinking deep into the snow. You never know what's really happening behind those walls. It was several miles to the ranger station. Liam held my hand while I talked. The cold bit at my face, my lungs burning with every breath through his fingers. After what felt like an hour, I saw it, my car. Every creak of the house idling at the edge of the ridge. Driver's door open, engine running. Whisper at our door. I ran to it, shouting, "Hey!" No answer. I started leaving the radio on after that, soft music. The heater blasted on full. The silence had changed. None leading away, none approaching. It felt alive, snow falling softly, Carol never came back. I turned off the engine, shut the door, and leaned against the hood, trying to make sense of it. For months, the house next door sat empty. The world was silent except for the whisper of the wind through the pines. The neighborhood pretended it hadn't happened, but everyone knew. Just a dark silhouette against the sky. Go up that summer. For the first time, when I passed, I glanced through the window and had ever faint outline of where their couch had been. The police found me a few hours later, there once, walking down the main road with my hands numb from cold. You were right, I told them everything quietly. The smoke, the woman, the photographs, the missing car. I shook my head. They sent a team up to the cabin. We didn't know. When they came back, their faces said it all. I'd heard the crying, one officer said, and told myself no signs of anyone living there. Now I know better. Either. We still live on Maple Drive. Snow. The new family next door is young, with a golden retriever that barks at everything. The photos still on the table. I don't mind the noise. And the note in Dana's handwriting isn't always safe. I half expected them to tell me I'd imagine the house settles into its old bones. They just looked at me with a kind of wary sympathy. Soft, they gave me a ride back to town, reminding me that a week later I sold the cabin. I told the realtor knowing the people around you are okay. I didn't look away. But sometimes feels wrong. Can't sleep. When you hear fear in someone's voice, an act, the firelight. We tell ourselves not to meddle and not to assume. The calm in her silence can be its own kind of danger. You shouldn't have left the door unlocked all those winters. On minding your own business. I used to think she meant on watching out for each other. That I'd left the cabin open. Sometimes the wall between your home and someone else's life is thinner than you think. Maybe she was right. Because when you leave parts of yourself unguarded, grief, guilt, regret, something always finds its way in. I used to think suburbs were safe. You can't outrun the past by locking the doors behind you. That was the whole point of moving there. Grief lingers in the empty spaces. After our second child, Claire and I wanted somewhere quiet. And if you ignore it long enough, it finds a way to speak. We'd lived in downtown Sacramento for years, but the late night noise and constant sirens made her nervous. Healing begins not in forgetting, we traded our cramped apartment for a beige two-story house on a cul-de-sac, lined with mailboxes and maple trees. It looked like the kind of place where people still borrowed cups of sugar and waved when they saw you pulling in from work. We met the neighbors within the first week. The Millers on one side, retirees with more lawn ornaments than I could count, and the Lamberts on the other, a young couple with twin boys. Everyone was polite, chatty in that surface-level way, and for the first time in years I felt like we'd done something right. Claire seemed happier too. She took morning walks with the baby stroller. If I close my eyes, I can still smell the summer of 1993, riding her scooter ahead of her. The sweat, I'd catch them from the faint sweetness of mango blossoms fighting to survive the heat. The stroller rolling smooth. Pune was a city caught between old habits and new beginnings then. It was the picture of normal. Streets buzzed with rickshaws, vendors, and laughter that carried farther than it should have in the choking air. A couple of friends from work, 17 and restless. Husband. That laughter sounded like another world. Nothing wild. The day my father died, after everyone left, the sky was the same color as boiled milk. That's when He'd gone to work early at the paint factory, just like always. By afternoon, a man from his shift showed up at our door with his cap in his hands and that look people get when they're about to break your heart. A dumb habit machine had jammed. He'd tried to fix it. I called inside. I don't remember much after that. She looked up from the sink, only my mother's scream and the silence that followed it, like the whole house had stopped breathing. Probably fell somewhere in the dirt. Mom, Sarita, I wanted to believe was 38 then. I knelt down digging through the soil, but tired looking. Still, I brushed it off. People said she was strong, but strength and exhaustion often wear the same face. By the time we locked months up after the funeral, it was past she lived like someone underwater. The house was quiet, cooking, except for the cleaning, hum of the AC. Breathing, but never really surfacing. Fast. But at 3 a.m., the rent was overdue. Me awake. The bills piled up, was sharp, and every conversation we had ended with, I sat up disoriented. We'll figure it out. What? When she remarried a year later, everyone called it sensible. The sound of the baby monitor that a woman alone with a teenage daughter. The low hiss the neighbors whispered, and under it's not safe. Something else. She's lucky. A whisper. Lucky. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering, and sprinted down the hall. Vikram Rao was the kind of man who took up too much space in a room. He owned paint stores across the city, wore iron shirts, and spoke like he was always teaching someone a lesson. He was tall, wearing dark clothes. At the wedding, he bent down, smiling wide, and said, his hand hovered over the crib. You're a smart girl, Asha. Whisper something. I'll make sure you stay that way. I couldn't make out the words, but they froze me in place. It sounded like a promise, but it wasn't. Hey, I shouted. We moved into his house and sat a shift path. His eyes caught the dim light. A 2-story building with clean white walls and a mango tree in the courtyard. He didn't go for the door. That tree was the only thing that felt kind. Glass rattled as he disappeared. I used to sit under it, reading. I rushed to the crib, pretending the world outside the gate was still mine. Claire appeared behind me. The first few months weren't bad. Mom seemed lighter. Who was that? Cooking fancy meals, smiling again, calling him Vikramji with the same careful tone people use when they don't know if they'll be answered kindly. The whole street bought me new notebooks, a desk, even a bicycle. But his eyes lingered too long on what I wore, how I sat, how long I stayed out, how long he'd been there. Girls should be home before sunset. When they finished searching the yard, the detective, Mom laughed it off then. Ruiz, came inside.
She's studying hard, Vikram. She's a good girl.
Small and black.
He smiled
inside your
but it wasn't the kind of smile that made you feel safe.
It was a tiny camera lens, no
Books
bigger
can't
than a
protect a
pencil
girl's
eraser.
reputation.
Claire's face went pale.
That was the
not
first
ours.
shadow that crossed
Louise
our new
nodded
home.
grimly.
The
Someone
laughter
modified it.
faded after that.
This wasn't a break-in
First
for valuables.
Mom's,
My stomach
then
dropped.
mine.
You mean he's been
By
watching
winter,
us?
the house had
Could be.
changed.
He paused.
You could feel it in the
Have
air.
you had any work done in the
Heavier,
house recently?
quieter,
Claire
like the
and I
walls were
looked at each
listening.
other. Yeah.
Vikram
She
made
said
rules for
quietly.
everything.
Last month.
What time I should
A
come
security
home,
installer.
who I could
Cameras,
talk to,
alarms, that kind of thing.
how long the curtains stayed
Ruiz's
open.
eyes narrowed. You
He
still
said it
have
was
his
for my
information?
safety. I nodded
But it
slowly,
felt like a slow
dread pooling in my
disappearance.
chest.
Yeah.
Discipline
it's in the
makes
drawer.
a person respectable.
The installer's name
You'd
was
say.
Kevin Moore.
Respectable.
Mid-30s, short, neatly dressed.
Another
with
word that
friendly
didn't mean
salesman
what it
smile.
sounded like.
He'd come recommended through
Mom
an
adjusted
online
quicker
ad.
than I did.
I remembered how
She spoke
polite
less,
he'd been,
smiled
taking
less.
off his shoes before
I'd
walking
catch her
in,
flinching at
explaining
sudden
everything
noises,
clearly.
pressing her palms
Motion
together as
sensors,
if praying for
cameras,
peace.
app setup.
At night, they argued
He
in
spent
whispers,
nearly 5 hours
the kind
in our
that
house
still
that
managed
day,
to cut through the
setting
walls.
up cameras in the entryway.
Sometimes
back
I'd hear
porch,
the
and
crash of a
nursery.
glass.
Claire
Sometimes
had been home
just
the whole
silence.
time.
He cut the
was
telephone
nice, she
line
told
one
the
morning.
detective.
Too
Maybe
many
too
useless
nice.
calls.
Talked a lot
He
about
said.
how families should
Then he
feel
forbade
safe.
visitors.
Detective Ruiz
My best friend
jotted that
Mina
down.
came by once.
Did he
bold
work
and
alone?
cheerful as ever.
No, he said his
He met
assistant
her at
called
the
out
gate.
sick. When they
My
left,
daughter
Ruiz
doesn't need
promised they'd
friends,
look
he
into
told
it.
her.
I spent the
needs
rest of the
focus.
night sitting by the window with a baseball
After
bat
that, I
across
stopped
my lap.
expecting normal.
The next morning,
Every
I checked
night
our
I'd sit
security
under the
system
mango
myself.
tree,
The
listening to the
cameras
leaves
worked, but
rustle.
when I logged into the app,
It was the only sound that
noticed
didn't
something
belong to
odd.
him.
There was another
One
user
evening I
account
came
listed,
home 10 minutes late.
one I hadn't created.
The bus had broken down. The
Guest
power was
01.
out, the house
I
lit only
deleted
by a
it
lantern in
instantly
the
and changed
courtyard.
every password I could
He
think
was sitting
of.
under the tree,
Wi-Fi,
smoking,
router, system
waiting.
login.
Traffic?
Then I tore apart the
He
flower
asked,
pot
his
and
voice
threw it
calm
in the
in a
trash.
way that made my
Days
stomach
turned
twist.
into weeks. The police
Yes.
never found him.
I whispered.
Ruiz said Moore's business had dissolved.
Buses don't take 10
His
minutes.
office empty, phone disconnected.
He stood,
Probably
flicking his
operated
cigarette
under
to
a
the
fake
ground.
name, he said.
You think
Claire
I don't
couldn't
know where
sleep
you
after
go?
that. Neither
My
could
throat
I.
tightened.
We started keeping the
I'm not
bedroom
lying.
door locked at night. Every
didn't
sound,
raise his
the creak
voice.
of a floorboard, the
He
hum
didn't
of the
need
fridge
to.
that made us jump.
Don't ever make me
Neighbors
doubt your
started
word
avoiding
again.
us. I
He
could
said
see it in
quietly,
their
stepping
eyes, the
closer.
quiet judgment.
The smell of
Bad
smoke and
things didn't
paint clung
happen
to
here.
her.
Not in their
Do you
perfect
understand?
suburb. Then
I
one night
nodded.
around 2 a.m.,
Mom found
I
me
woke to
crying
the
that
faint
night.
sound of static again.
I tried to tell her,
The
but she
baby
just
monitor.
said, "He's
I sat
strict,
up,
that's
pulse
all."
quickening.
Men are like
The
that.
screen was
You'll
dark,
see.
but the sound was there.
I
Not
wanted to
crying,
ask if
breathing.
my father had
I
ever made her
unplugged
this
it, threw it
afraid, but
against
I
the wall.
didn't.
Claire woke
The
with a
letter
start.
came in April
What
in a
is it?
plain brown envelope.
Someone was on the feed.
I'd been waiting weeks
We
for
packed
it.
the kids into the
A
car and
scholarship
drove
to
straight
study
to her sister's
architecture in
house across
Mumbai.
town.
I
didn't
tore it
go
open
back
in the
until morning.
courtyard, right under the mango
When I
tree.
did, I found a note
Sunlight
under the doormat.
spilling through the leaves.
2 words. Nice family.
Congratulations,
We
Miss
sold
Knight.
the house within
It
3
began.
months.
You've been
Claire didn't
selected
want
for
to,
admission.
but she couldn't walk past that
I
nursery
read it
without
over and
crying.
over, my hands shaking.
I couldn't either.
It was
We moved
freedom.
to an apartment complex
Maybe
downtown.
the only one I'd ever
Smaller,
have.
noisier, but somehow
That
safer.
evening, I showed it to Mom
There's
while
comfort
Vikram
in
was
noise
out.
now. I
She
changed
smiled
careers
for the
after
first
that.
time in months.
Started working for a home security
did it,
company.
She
The
said,
legitimate kind.
hugging me tightly.
It felt ironic at first,
But he found
also
it later,
right.
on the table.
Sometimes when people call nervous
"What's
about
this?"
small things,
he asked,
a missing key,
waving
a
the
flickering
letter like it
camera
was a
light,
crime.
I tell them,
My
change the locks
scholarship,
anyway.
I said, heart
I never
pounding.
mentioned what happened to us.
I got in.
Not the missing
He tore it
key,
in half.
not the whisper in the nursery.
You think
not
you can
the
run
camera
away to
hidden in the
Mumbai and
monitor.
disgrace this
Some
family?
things are better left
Vikram.
unspoken.
Mom
but every
started,
time I
but he
see a
turned on
flower
her.
pot by a front door,
Hard work doesn't make a girl
I think about
respectable.
how easy it
He
is
shouted.
to confuse safety
You
with
want her
habit,
living alone
because
among
safety
strangers?
isn't the locks you buy.
The
It's
silence
the ones
after
you
that
build
was
in your
worse than
mind.
the shouting.
The ones that make you
Mom
pay
looked at
attention
me,
before
then at
something
him.
happens, not after.
Let her go, she said softly. Please. He stared at her like she'd spoken another language. Then he turned to me,
If you'd
voice
asked me
low.
before that winter,
You're
I
not
would have
going
said
anywhere.
Our family was as ordinary
You'll
as
learn
any
your
on Maple
place.
Drive.
That
Dad
night I
worked
lay
maintenance
awake,
at the community
staring at the
college.
ceiling fan.
Mom taught
the
second
shadows
grade.
of mango leaves swaying
My
across
little
the
sister,
wall.
Lily, was 8.
I made
and
my
was
decision
16,
before morning.
half bored, half
When
restless.
Vikram left for his store
convinced
the
that
next
nothing
week,
exciting ever
I packed
happened in our
quietly.
quiet Ohio suburb.
My notebooks, some clothes.
That changed when Dad
the
brought
torn
home the
letter
lights.
folded neatly in
He'd
my
seen some
bag.
viral video online.
Mom stood by the
A
door,
house
pale
synchronized
but
to
steady.
Christmas music.
You'll
And
go
got
to
it
your
in his
uncle's in
we could
Mumbai,
do it too.
she said.
He called
He'll
it
keep
a
you
family
safe.
project.
I
But
hesitated.
really, it was his way of proving
He'll
that
hurt
we
you.
could keep up with the big houses across
She smiled
town.
faintly.
The Harrises didn't
He
take
already
vacations
does.
to Disney or drive
We
new
didn't
cars,
cry.
but by God,
There wasn't
we could
time
have
for
the
that.
brightest house on the block.
I left through the
It
side
started
gate,
in early November.
the one beneath the mango
Every
tree.
weekend we climbed
Its
ladders,
branches brushed my
strung
shoulder
wires,
as I passed,
tested circuits.
like a blessing.
Dad even bought a
Or maybe a goodbye.
controller that connected the lights
That
to
night,
songs on the radio.
Vikram's anger
When
could
it
be
worked,
heard
when
down the
whole
street.
house blinked and danced
The next
perfectly
morning,
to
Mom
Jingle
called from
Bell
a
Rock.
payphone.
We stood
Her
out
voice
front
was
in the
calm.
cold, grinning
"Be
like
free,"
idiots.
she said, and hung
Cars
up.
slowed to watch.
I cried for the
Neighbors
first time
waved.
in years.
I felt proud.
It's been 12 years
like we
since that
built
summer.
something together
I'm
that
30
couldn't
now,
be ignored.
an architect living in Mumbai.
Mom loved it too at first.
Mom lives with me
She'd
in a
hand
small
out
apartment
cocoa to
with
the
bright
families
blue
who
walls
stopped
and
to
too
take
many
pictures.
books. She still
It's
makes
bringing
tea the
people
way she
joy,
used to when I was
she
little.
said.
Strong
Nothing
and
wrong
sweet,
with a little extra
with a touch
light.
of cardamom. I went back to
Inside,
Pune once
we
for
were
work.
happy in the simple ways
The house on
families are.
Sadashiv Lane
Happy
was still
dinner at
there.
6, Dad humming
The
along
walls
to
were
the older
cracked,
station.
the paint
Lily
fading.
writing letters to Santa.
But it was the absence
I
that hit
didn't
me
realize
hardest.
how fragile that kind of
The
peace
mango
could
tree
be,
was gone,
or how easily
replaced
it
by
could
a
attract
concrete
the wrong
parking
kind of
shed.
attention.
I stood there
The
for a
week
long
before
time,
Christmas, we made the local
remembering
news.
the girl who sat under
A
that
reporter
tree,
came by,
terrified to
filmed
speak.
the house, interviewed
I
Dad
used to
on the
think
lawn.
survival meant silence.
He was
Now I know
glowing.
it means speaking.
My old man who never
even when
bragged
your
about
voice
anything,
trembles.
standing
Some
there in his
wounds
work
never
boots saying,
fade,
"We just
but
wanted to
neither
spread
does
some
the
cheer."
strength that comes
The
from
video
walking
went
away.
online.
True
Thousands
freedom
of
begins
views,
where fear
comments like,
ends.
"Looks amazing," and "Wish my neighbors did this." But there were other comments
I used to
too.
think peace had a
People
sound.
asking for our address.
For me, it was the
wondering
hum of
what
the
kind
washing
equipment
machine
we
on a
used,
quiet Sunday,
joking
or the
about how
sound
the
of my
electric
daughter,
bill must be
Ella,
crazy, singing in her room
One
while the
said,
sun came through the
"Bet
lace
they've got some
curtains.
nice stuff inside that house."
Our house on Waimari Road
I
looked
didn't
like
tell my
every
parents
postcard
that part.
version of home. Back then, I
White
thought
fence,
the
neat
internet was
rows of
just
roses,
noise. A garden shed
That
that
year,
smelled like soil
Christmas
and
felt
glass.
bigger than ever.
From the outside,
Relatives
we were doing
visited,
just fine.
presents piled
But
under
peace
the
is tricky,
tree,
and the house
it can hide the
buzzed with
tremors
warmth
beneath the
and light.
floorboards.
Dad
Peter
and I
kept
had
the
the
show
show
running
running
every
every
night
2
until
years.
10.
He was a postal
When snow
worker.
fell on Christmas
Proud of
Eve,
his
the lights
precision.
made it look like
We
we were
woke up
living
at
inside a
5:30
snow
every
globe.
morning, poured his
Mom
coffee,
called it
2 sugars,
a
no
perfect
cream,
year.
and read the newspaper
She didn't know
before
that.
leaving exactly
In
at
between
6.
songs,
I
I'd
used to
noticed a
find
dark
comfort in that
SUV
rhythm.
parked
I
across the
joked
street
that I
a few
could set the
times.
clocks by his footsteps.
The windows were tinted,
But over
engine
time, the
idling.
routine became a
I
wall
figured it was
between
just
us
people
instead
watching
of
the
a
show.
foundation.
Lots
It
of
started
cars
when his
stopped to
hours
see
were
it.
cut back.
Why worry about
Money
one
got
more?
tight.
And Peter's
Inside, the gifts
predictability
glittered
hardened
beneath
into
the tree.
something colder.
Some of them were small.
He began keeping
Socks,
track of every
books,
expense,
but others
lining
weren't.
up bills by date
Mom
and
had
color
saved
coding
up for a new
envelopes.
laptop for Dad.
At dinner,
He bought
he'd
her
glance at
jewelry
the
he
clock
couldn't
before
really
he served the
afford.
plates.
I'd gotten
If it was a
Lily
minute
bike,
past 6,
the
his
first
jaw
brand
would
new one
tighten.
she'd ever
Time
had.
is money, Margaret.
We'd done well
He'd
that
say,
year without looking
and
at
we
me.
wanted to show it.
You waste one, you waste
Maybe
both.
too much.
I'd nod,
After
apologize,
the
and
big
promise
Christmas
to do
dinner,
better.
I remember standing
I was
outside with
exhausted,
Dad,
our breath
from the
turning
florist
white in the
shop,
cold.
from pretending
Looks good,
everything
huh?
was okay, he said, looking up at
From
the
being
lights.
the glue that never stopped
I told
holding.
him, it's awesome.
Ella
He clapped
15
me on the
and
shoulder,
sharper.
then she led on.
You helped
Learned
make
to
this
read the
happen.
silence. That means
She
something.
knew the difference between her
I wanted
father's
to believe
quiet
him.
and his temper.
But when I
if
looked
a
down
chair
the street,
scraped too hard
the other
against the
houses
floor,
were
she'd
dark,
stay upstairs.
ordinary.
If the kettle
For the
clicked
first
off, it
time,
meant
our
the storm
brightness
had
made
passed.
me uneasy.
By winter,
Like
I
we
started
were shouting
spending
in
more
a
time
place
in the
meant for
glass
whispers.
shed at the back of the yard.
I told
2
everyone
nights
it
after
was for my
Christmas,
orchids, but
we were
really
finishing
it was the
dinner
only
when
place
the
I could
power
breathe.
flickered.
Then
I'd
went
sit there long
completely
after
out.
dark, trimming
The
leaves
sudden
that
dark
need
felt
trimming,
strange.
whispering to the
No
plants
hum
as if
from
they
the
might
fridge.
whisper back.
No glow from the windows.
One night, Ella found me
Lily
crying over a
squealed.
broken pot.
Mom said,
"What happened, Mom?"
Must be
She
the
asked,
storm.
her voice trembling.
Though there wasn't one.
I blinked hard, forcing a smile.
Dad grabbed a flashlight.
He said
and
I
went
watered
to the
the
garage
roses
to
too
check
much.
the breaker.
Maybe he's
I
right.
followed a few steps
Maybe I ruined
behind.
everything I touched.
The air felt colder
She
near
reached
the
for
door.
my hand, but I pulled
heard
away
him
gently.
curse softly.
"Go inside, sweetheart.
Damn things
It's cold."
tripped again.
That
Then
night,
a crash,
when I
a door
finally
slamming
came in,
open.
the kitchen clock read
Before I could move, 3
11:47.
men burst in from the side
Peter
door,
was asleep
faces
on the
hidden
couch.
under ski masks.
Bills spread
One
across his
shoved Dad
chest
against
like a
the wall.
shield.
Another
I stood
waved
there
a
a
gun.
long time.
Mom
Wondering when
screamed
the
from the
house had
kitchen.
stopped feeling
Everybody Everybody down, now!
It happened on a Saturday.
My knees hit the tile.
The kind of gray, heavy
Lily
day
was
where
crying.
the sky looks tired of
I could
holding
smell the
itself
mud
up.
on their boots, the sweat
Ella
and
had
metal
needed
of the
paints
gun.
for a school art project.
Where's the
Nothing
safe?
fancy, just a few
demanded.
brushes and watercolors.
We don't
We
them
don't have
after
a
my
safe,
shift at the
Dad
florist,
stammered.
thinking Peter wouldn't mind.
Don't lie to me.
$15
The man didn't
snapped.
seem like much to
The
spend
house,
on your
the
child's
lights,
dreams.
all this crap.
When he
You
came
got
home and
money
saw the
somewhere.
receipt on the table,
They
he
tore
didn't
through the
yell.
living room, yanking
Peter
drawers
never yelled.
open, dumping boxes.
He simply picked up
I could
the
hear
paper,
ornaments breaking.
looked at it for a long
One
moment
grabbed
and
Mom's
said,
wrist, yanking off
"We
her
can't
bracelet.
afford this."
I stood halfway,
She needed
not
them.
thinking.
I said softly,
Just wanting him to let
I
her
said
go.
no extras until I'm back full time.
The gun turned toward me.
It was $15,
Sit down,
Peter.
kid. He didn't
Move
answer.
again, I'll make you sit.
He just walked to the cabinet.
I froze.
Took down his coffee mug.
It
the
felt
same
like
one
hours,
he used every
but it
morning.
was
and
maybe
dropped
10
it.
minutes before they ran
It
out.
shattered across
Arms
the
full
floor.
of porcelain
Porcelain
skating
taken.
into the
The door
baseboards.
slammed.
Then
The sound made
silence.
Ella flinch. Dad crawled to the shards, then his hands shaking as he called 911. That's what happens when people don't listen. When the police arrived, he turned and walked upstairs. Their lights painted the house red and blue. I knelt, shaking, and started picking up the neighbors came out in robes, whispering. One cut into my palm, but I sat with Lily wrapped in a blanket. I pressed the fragments into my hand until I saw tiny beads of watching the lights flicker on our windows one last time before the power company restored them. Ella came down a few minutes later, taken our electronics. She didn't say anything, just grabbed a broom and helped me sweep up. But what they really took was something harder to tell her it was going to be okay. That the next morning better, but I didn't believe it anymore. Broken glass. That night I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. The Christmas tree smelled like it had been forgotten sideways in a storm. I stared at the ceiling. Mom tried to clean, but her hands kept shaking. Dad just stood by the window staring at the yard full of deflated decorations. Silently, he unplugged the controller and tossed it in the trash. Peter didn't ask why. The police came back that afternoon, orbiting the same house. They said the robbers. I'd wake before dawn just to walk through the garden while the world still felt soft and untouched. People who looked like they had valuables. The roses had started to wither, and I couldn't bring myself to open curtains. All of it had made us stand out. That was still trying. The shed wasn't your refuge again. The officer told. I started collecting things. They pick easy targets, broken china, coins, dried petals, but I could see it in small stones from the riverbank. He blamed himself. I put them in glass jars, one for each memory I couldn't shake. We slept in the same room. It would have looked like us together. To me, it was I remember Lily whispering, could still be beautiful. They're not coming back, right? One evening, Ella came to the shed holding 2 mugs of cocoa. Softly, Mom, they're gone, she said, handing me one. I wanted to believe her. You're scaring me. But every sound looked up from my jars. The creak of the furnace, the groan of the wind. You don't even look at Dad. In the days that followed, neighbors dropped off food. Some silences are safer than words. Some even donated money to replace what was stolen. He's not going to change, is he? But when someone suggested helping Dad rebuild the display next year, I called my boss and said I was feeling off. No more lights. The truth was, I couldn't face another day arranging flowers for people who still had joy to celebrate. I saw something change in him after that. The walls of the house still smiled at Peter's quiet disapproval, but his laughter never quite reached his eyes. Every clink of a dish, every footstep, he double-locked every door, like a violation. Checked windows twice. I learned to move softly, to disappear in plain sight. Mom took down the last of the decorations I didn't remember leaving. The house police said they found me walking barefoot along the Avon River. I missed the glow, but I understood why it had to go. When they asked what I was doing, I told them I was returning what was never caught the men. I remember their puzzled faces covered some of what we lost. I remember the sound of the water, soft and endless. By the next Christmas, they called it an acute stress reaction. We still decorated. I called it forgetting how to live. Just a few lights around the porch. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and rain. Inside, though, we were close, sterile, safe. We cooked together, played games, told stories instead of watching TV. I spent the first 3 days presents, Dad said. You know, Evan, twitched for the field I used to think showing people the doctors were kind but being seen, speaking in words but like maybe it just means being together. Mechanisms. I nodded. I didn't correct them. Yeah. How do you explain being seen doesn't always your only language for years? Peter smiled, tired but warm. He sat by the bed, staring at the floor. You're growing up, kid. You need rest, he said. We never went back to the big displays. I whispered. Still, he didn't answer. Each year when I plug in that single string of porch lights, I left. I watched him walk down the hallway and disappear behind the automatic doors. The way Ella visited every day than any She'd bring me small things, photos, but I also think about what followed. The garden, the quiet mornings, I watered your corn dinners, the soft laughter that replaced the blinding glow. They're still blooming. I smiled now, faintly. Years later. Good. Whenever I drive past the houses that sparkle like Vegas on a cul-de-sac, when they finally sent me home, I feel both admiration and worry. Spotless, sterile. Beauty draws eyes. The shed door was locked. Sometimes the wrong ones. I didn't ask for the key. We still celebrate. Peter went back to work quieter than ever. We still believe in light. I began moving through the days like learned how to keep herself from a distance, how to let it warm. Ella started packing for college. She was ready to leave. That's what growing up really is. Maybe she'd been ready for years. Learning the difference between Ella left for university, I stood by the car and tried to memorize her face without awareness and sunlight in her hair. The Harris family learned that joy isn't measured by how loudly it glows, but by how safely it endures. You've got your whole life ahead, as in that winter we must remember. I'll call every day. Being seen isn't the same as being secure, but don't stay too close to the truest light is the one that shines quietly within. After she drove away, I walked to the shed and unlocked the door for the first time in months. Dust motes swirled like tiny ghosts. My jars still lined the shelves. I used to think the ocean could wash anything in the morning light. Maybe that's why I chose to live my hands by the river. For the sound, the distance, and the illusion that salt water could scrub away the things I didn't want to remember. I held it to my chest and whispered, "My name's Leotardo. I live on the coast just outside Cannon Beach, Oregon. That night, I left the jar on Ella's just a weather-worn bungalow tucked against the dunes, but it's home. I didn't leave a note. My husband Rick works nights with the Coast Guard. She'd find it, and I work as a wildlife rescuer for a small non-profit. Shining. My days are full of the next morning. I went outside to water the roses and the occasional fox that strays too close to the highway. Some stems bent under their own weight, but they were alive, reaching toward the sun. My German Shepherd, 100 pounds of loyalty and didn't feel afraid. He came from a rescue shelter. Silence you. Nervous around when strangers, but fierce when it mattered. When
Rick's
fear
gone,
replaces
Max is
trust,
my
it's
shadow.
not love, it's
Padding
survival.
beside me through every
Sometimes
creak and
healing
whisper
doesn't mean
of the
fixing
old
what's
house.
broken, but
That
learning
March
to
evening
grow
had been
around
calm.
it. Just like
The air
roots
was
finding
heavy with
light
brine,
through cracked soil,
the kind that sticks
and
to
in
your
that quiet,
skin,
fragile growth,
and
you
the
find
moon was a
yourself
sliver
again.
over the water.
I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through intake forms for a stranded seal pup when Max started barking. Not the casual,
before I learned the truth
about
about
my
bark.
family. It was
I
sharp,
believed we
guttural.
were perfect.
The sound
We
he
lived
made
in a
when
white
something wasn't
two-story
right.
home
with navy shutters and
Max,
a mailbox
enough.
my father polished
I
every
called from
Sunday
the
morning.
doorway.
He
My
didn't
mother,
stop.
Helen, was the kind of
His
woman
body
who
was
baked
pressed
pies
against the
that
back
looked like
fence,
magazine
tail covers
stiff.
and arranged
Teeth
flowers
bared
so
at the dark
precisely
stretch
it
of
seemed
trees
to sound
beyond
to
the
touch
yard.
them. My
I
father
grabbed my
marked the
flashlight
sharp
and
pulled on
incarnate.
Rick's old flannel
Handshakes
and stepped out
firm
into
to the
the
wind.
wind, gleaming, his laughter
The beam
warm
cut
enough to
through
melt
mist
strangers
into
into
grass.
friends. Max! To the outside
shouted
world,
again.
we were the portrait of happiness.
Silence.
Inside we
Then
were
the
glass.
sound of paws
Beautiful,
thudding
but
against
one
the
crack
earth
away from
receding.
shattering. I ran to the gate,
Our
but it
lives
was
ran
wide
on
open,
schedule.
the latch hanging
Dinner
loose.
at 6 sharp, church
On the
every
ground,
Sunday.
glinting in my
Chores
flashlight
done
was
before
Max's
play.
leather
My
collar.
mother's watch was her
torn
second
clean
heart.
through, ticking louder
Panic
whenever
hits
my father
differently when
was
it's
near.
quiet.
He liked
The
control,
only
and
sound
we
was the
mistook it for
waves,
love.
low and endless.
If
If
my
my
own
own
heart
heart
wasn't
wasn't
pounding
pounding
right,
right,
his eyes would narrow. I called for
If
Max
Mom
until my
overcooked
throat
the roast,
burned. He'd set his
then
fork
bolted
down
back
inside and grabbed
A
a small
small
sound, but it could
Rick
stretch
answered
for
on the
hours.
first ring.
Silence
His voice
became our
crackling
family's
over
second
static.
language. I was
Leah,
9
everything
the first
okay?
time I noticed something
Someone's
wasn't
taken
right.
Max, I said,
Mom had
barely
worn a
getting the
scarf to
words
church
out.
on a warm spring
The gate's
day.
open. His
When I
collar's
asked
on the
about it,
ground.
she smiled and said
Rick's
she'd
tone
tone
chill.
changed instantly. Later, while helping
the
her in the
doors.
garden,
Stay inside.
I saw the edge of a
I'm calling
purple
the sheriff
bruise
right
beneath
now.
the fabric. I
She
double-checked
froze
every
when she
window,
noticed
every
my
latch,
stare.
even the sliding glass
Some
door that
things,
never quite
she
shut
whispered,
right.
aren't
The house
meant to be
felt
talked
suddenly
about.
small. Then
Every
she
creak
patted
in
my
the
hand
woods
as
sounded
if her
like
touch could
footsteps.
erase the color from her
I
skin.
kept the porch light on, phone in
At
hand,
night, I'd
waiting
hear
for
them through the
headlights that
vents.
didn't come.
His voice low
Then
and
maybe
angry.
15
minutes
minutes
later,
later,
I heard a sound
apologizing
from
for
the
things I
laundry
didn't
room.
understand.
A dull, heavy
Then
thud.
the apologies would stop.
Max,
replaced
my
by the
voice
sound of
cracked.
dishes shattering.
I took a
with
few
hollow
steps
slam
down the
of a
hall.
door.
I'd
Then I
bury
heard
my
it,
head
a
under the
bark.
pillow.
Short,
praying
muffled,
morning
but
would
his
come quickly.
relief hit me like a wave.
On the surface, nothing
I
ever
swung the door
changed.
opens and froze.
We smiled
A
for
man
family
was crouched
photos,
beside the
brought
washing
casserole,
machine,
one
to
hand
potlucks,
clamped
waved
over
at
Max's
neighbors.
muzzle.
His
But
other
each
hand
act
held
held
a
a screwdriver,
screwdriver.
like lines in a play.
Not quite
we
a
couldn't
weapon,
stop
but close
performing.
enough.
My father liked
Quiet,
to remind
he
us
hissed.
people are watching. His eyes darted between
Don't
me and
forget
the
who you
window.
represent.
I don't want trouble.
I didn't understand
I
it
just
then.
need your car keys.
But what he really
My
meant
hands
was,
trembled as I
don't
pointed
ruin
to
my
the
image.
counter. There, please, just
That
take
year,
them. My mother
he
started
moved
collecting
fast,
angel
snatching the
figurines,
keys,
then looked at me once
small
more.
porcelain things.
You're
with
lucky your
delicate
dog
wings
listens.
and kind faces.
Then he was gone. She said they
The door
brought
banging
peace.
open, footsteps
Every time
fading
my
into the
father
night.
lost his temper, the sheriff's
I'd find
cruiser
her
showed up
dusting
20
them
minutes
afterward,
later,
her hands
light
shaking.
spinning blue across the
They
dunes.
remind me to believe in good,
Max
she
was
told
pressed
me
against
once.
my leg the whole time.
I wanted to believe in it
trembling
too,
but unhurt. But every night that belief
Deputy
felt thinner.
Harris, a broad man
Stretched
with
like
kind
glass,
eyes, ready
listened
to
as I
break.
recounted every
By the
detail.
time I turned 12, dinner
You
had
said he
become a
didn't hurt
ritual
you,
of
he
performance.
No, the table was
Just
always
scared
set
me half to
perfectly.
death.
Cloth napkins
He nodded
folded like
scribbling
swans,
notes.
silverware gleaming,
We've got
candles
reports of
unlit
an
but
escapee
waiting.
from the state
My
penitentiary
father's
up in
mood
Tillamook.
dictated everything. Could
If
be
he
your
walking
guy.
whistling, the night
We'll
might
put out
pass
an alert on your
quietly.
vehicle.
If he came home
Rick
silent,
got home
a
at
storm
dawn.
was brewing.
He wrapped me in
One
his arms
Tuesday,
and
he
didn't
came
say a
home
word
late.
for a long time. The air smelled of
When he
whiskey
finally
even
pulled
before he
back,
hung up
his
his
face
coat.
was pale.
Mom's
You
hands
could have been
twitched as she
killed,
placed
Leah.
the roast on the
I
table.
knew that. You're
The
late,
thought
she
kept
said
replaying.
softly.
How
He
close he'd
smiled
been, how
thinly.
easily it could have
Traffic.
gone wrong. His smile
2
didn't
days
reach his
later, the
eyes.
police called.
Or maybe someone's
They'd
been
found my truck
gossiping
20
about me
miles
again.
north.
Crashed
I
against
didn't
a guardrail.
understand what he meant, but
Mom's
the
face
driver
went
was
pale.
pale.
Escaped
No one's
convict
talking
named
about
Daniel
you,
Boyd.
Mark.
Everyone
Everyone
talks.
2 prior assaults.
He took a sip of
For
water,
a long
then
time,
slammed
I
the
couldn't
glass
sleep.
down hard enough to make
Every
it jump.
sound outside felt
Especially
like
when
footsteps
someone
returning.
doesn't know her place.
Max barely left my
the roast
side,
grew
sleeping
cold
at
while
the
they
foot of the
argued in
bed,
quiet
growling
tones
in
sharp as
shadows.
knives. Rick took extra
I
steps
stared
so
at
he
the
could be
clock,
home
counting
during the day,
seconds,
and I
wishing
threw
them
myself
away.
into work. Then the
Rescuing,
crashing, healing, the
fixing.
sound of a plate hitting
It was
the
the
wall.
only way I knew to
I
quiet the
jumped.
noise inside. inside my mother flinched but didn't cry. The nightmares had eased, that was her strength. But the fear lingered in small ways. She never gave him the satisfaction of tears. Twice, checking the back door. That night I heard her sobbing through the vents again. One afternoon, this time I was driving back from a rescue call register and hit record. Pelican tangled in fishing line. I don't know what made me do it. When I realized I'd started taking the long route home without proof that our perfect home wasn't perfect at all. The crash site was on the main highway. At school the next day, my teacher noticed my silence. At the center, people asked how I was doing. She asked. I always handed her my phone with trembling hands. But fine was just a word. She listened, her eyes darkening. Rick tried to help, but he carried his own guilt. By evening, blue and red lights danced for telling me to stay inside instead of coming straight through the window as officers led my father away. Sat on the porch watching the sunset. He said quietly, my mother clutching her robe like armor. For the first time I saw him if I hadn't gone outside, as if the air was hers again. The house felt empty after he was gone, but it wasn't peace. You did what anyone would have done.
The silence that once frightened us now hummed like a ghost, eyes half closed. Mom tried to fill it. I reached down and scratched behind his ear. The radio, the hum of the dishwasher, that soft singing while she cleaned. In some ways, more protective in others. Her hands still shook. The vet said trauma can change animals too. Some brought casseroles, others brought the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt. We had no idea, Mrs. Dalton said. I realized then that fear doesn't vanish. He seemed like such a good man. It just becomes something you learn to live beside. No one really wanted the truth. Always there, rising and falling, that their own lives were safe. I slept better before I stopped flinching. But sometimes I dreamed he'd come back. By then, life had returned to its down the hall. Rescues, I'd wake sweating, quiet pounding, convinced the sound of the surf outside our window. Mom would find me on the couch, curled up with the lights on, installed motion lights. He can't hurt us anymore. And finally adopted a second rescue dog. I wanted to believe her. A timid husky mix named Luna. Trauma doesn't leave quietly. Max treated her like family from day one. 2 jobs. Sometimes she never asked why I didn't move after what happened. Still wore long sleeves. I tell them no matter the season. Because this is I tried to be strong for her. Fear doesn't get to take the old fear flicker. One autumn morning, I was walking both dogs along the cliffs when I met an older woman collecting driftwood. We rebuilt our lives slowly. She smiled and said, "Church helped us, though people meant well. You must feel safe. I learned to speak up. I hesitated when something felt wrong. Safer than I used to. I promised myself I'd never become like him." But anger is a tricky inheritance. Sometimes the ones we save end up cracks if you don't guard against it. Her words stayed with me long after she walked away. I had to learn that control wasn't strength and silence wasn't peace. As I sat by the fire with Max's head in my lap, 26, I finally understood. I live in a quiet apartment. The world is ticking clocks and no rules about dinner time. It can turn on you without warning. Mom visits sometimes. One moment calm, the next chaos. Gentler, but still flinches when doors slam too hard. We talk about everything except the years we lost. Courage isn't the absence by our old house. It's learning family lives there now. Despite it. Toys scatter the yard. Leah discovered that strength isn't found in walls, locks, or distance. It's the kind of sound we never had to others, and to the creatures we both sorrow and hope, and to the part of ourselves that we told ourselves to surrender to fear. But real love, I've learned, is messy. It forgives, it listens, it breathes. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was real. True perfection doesn't come from appearance. When I first moved to Boston, I wasn't looking for luxury. It comes from honesty, compassion, and the courage to face what's broken instead of hiding it. That I could make it to my homes are not the ones that look downtown without 2 transfers, but the ones where the love is allowed to be human. Carver Street fit the bill. A narrow 1-bedroom tucked inside a 19th century brick building with tall windows and crooked floors. People tell you that time heals everything in the daylight, and they never say how quiet the healing is. I was 27. For me, it began fresh out of grad school, the kind that hums inside your skull like an old trying to finish a collection of essays I hoped would get me somewhere. The house felt like a museum. The rent was cheap because, as the landlord said with a laugh, 2 mugs in the sink. Old buildings have their moods. My upstairs neighbor, of a man's footsteps, Mr. Leonard, stopped belonging Everyone to called me him years before because of his last name. I taught art at the community college in downtown Portland for nearly 20 years. Soft-spoken, polite. My students came cardigans and smelled like pipes with talent. Retirees chasing on weekends, he played old jazz records late into the night. Grocery lists and carpools. The sound floated through the ceiling like a heartbeat. The house was officially mine. Steady. I realized I didn't want to charge people for painting anymore. For months, life was quiet. I wanted to share something gentler. I worked, wrote, fed my cat Nora. Painting on was born. The city was loud outside, but in my studio like Thursday evenings. I liked the artist therapy, I called it. Then one Friday in October, the first night only 3 people showed up. One of them was Kodaika, a small stack of bills. He came late, standing in the doorway like he wasn't on my counter when I got home. Mid-30s, I remembered locking the door that morning. Hair, shoulders too stiff. I told myself I must have brought it in earlier and forgotten. Traffic makes you paranoid. His voice had that clipped rhythm. Soldiers keep in my ears after service, and I hadn't. I told him, smiling. By Monday, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. He nodded and chose the stool near the window. I checked the lock from everyone else before leaving for work, and again when I handed him a brush, his hands trembled. Everything looked normal, but the air felt off. It was familiar, charged. The same tremor I'd watched in my own storm years before he shipped off to Afghanistan. That night, while I was in the shower, that night I barely painted. Faint footsteps in the living room. I watched time mix colors like someone performing surgery. Careful. He asked no questions. The kind of sound that makes your body react before your brain can reason might disappear. I turned off the water, ended still hard behind, wiping his brushes too carefully. I called out, "You teach every week?" Silence. He asked, wrapped every Thursday. I crept into the hallway. "I'll be here." The apartment looked empty. Something about the way but when I reached the kitchen, I saw that the small bowl where I always kept my keys was empty. The quiet center of the room. I tore through drawers, checked my coat pocket under cushions, spilled nothing. He worked in silence. I told myself maybe I'd left them in my bag, but I knew I started rearranging the tables. That night I barely closer to me. Around 2 a.m., a soft tap, tap, tap started from the ceiling. During cleanup one evening, I asked, rhythmic. "Do you ever paint outside class?" Then clear as day, a whisper. He hesitated. "Don't go to sleep yet." Helps keep my hands steady. The voice was muffled but real. A small shake of his head. I stared up, unable to move. I just burned them. The next morning, my hands shook as I called the landlord. He met my eyes for the first time. "The pipes make weird noises," he said. "Old buildings, remember?" I didn't just mention it as if it made sense. Saying it out loud. The next week, I brought in lavender tea instead of coffee. Together. hoping I started leaving a light on in every room like smoke. Nora the cat hissed at the corners of the ceiling, sometimes like pacing under one spot near the hallway. What was she like? One evening, I decided to confront Mr. Leonard. Maybe the tapping was his doing. She forgave things that shouldn't be forgiven. Or some creaky floorboard. That line stayed with me for days. I knocked on his door. It was something my son Tyler might have said before he died. I kept telling myself it was coincidence. Everything okay down there? The look in his eyes. I keep hearing noises, I said, but the echo was too strong. Like footsteps or someone moving around. Sometimes I'd catch myself saying Tyler instead of his expression didn't quickly correct his eyes did. One night after class, he told me he felt before softening again. Every time I leave here, carry every sound. There's a car a few blocks back. I nodded, gray sedan. No plates on the front, just checking. Maybe it's just your nerves, I pushed the couch under the spot. Anxiety can make shadows out of nothing. I climbed up and tapped the ceiling. He gave a faint, humorless smile. When I pressed harder, the plaster shadows are real, like there was a gap above it. When he left, I jotted the exchange into my teaching notebook. There was space up there. Subject shows recurring paranoia. I went to bed fully dressed, a flashlight on my nightstand. I told myself it was for a case study I was writing on veterans. Around midnight, I heard it again, and that same no one had asked me to write overhead. I'd had enough. Blurred. The next morning, faithfully until the first snow. Two officers arrived. The chair by the window stayed empty, both brushes untouched. Anyone else have access to your sick? Then I wondered if he'd finally burned his paintings. Just the landlord and my upstairs neighbor. After 2 missed sessions, I called the number on his registration form. Near the hallway light fixture, the younger officer pointed. There, see that line? By the 3rd week, the silence felt unbearable, almost invisible. I printed his address from the sign-up sheet and drove there after class. They fetched a ladder from the cruiser and pushed it open. Quiet. Dust fell like snow. His street ended near an empty field flashlight into the darkness. When I pulled up to the house number, my stomach dropped. There's a crawl space between the windows boarded. He climbed up. A for sale sign hung crookedly for a moment, then called down. I knocked anyway. You'll want to see this. A woman watering her yard next door looked over. Inside the narrow space were blankets, a flashlight, and a small camera. Tyson Ward. She frowned. A hole cut through the wood directly above my bedroom. The officers went upstairs. I waited in the hallway, shaking. Some vet owned it before, but he passed away. Mr. Leonard in handcuffs. Suicide, I think. Found a key ring with her apartment shaking so badly I dropped my car keys. He didn't fight. That can't be right. Didn't even look surprised. He was in my class last week. Me, he said softly, almost kindly. She gave me a sympathetic look and went back inside. Kept the lights off. I sat in the car for almost an hour, heart pounding. The police finally drove home. I called my therapist through the rambling voicemail, entering whenever I was out. Sometimes while I slept. Please call me back. Photographs of me taken from that hole in the studio felt wrong. Shots of me reading, cooking, even sleeping. Silent witnesses. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind my fingers over the suitcase of clothes. My eyes caught on one canvas I didn't remember finishing, but I never went to his face. Soft light across his every sound. The same scar above his brow. My son had every light on, every curtain shut. I learned what real fear feels like. I realized there were dozens of not running, all the quiet kind that lives slightly different. I didn't go to work. I found another place eventually. Instead, I stayed in the studio cataloging the paintings with neighbors who actually spoke to one another. Each was dated in my hand, but I started to feel human memory of some of them. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I still hear the faint echo of jazz in my head. March 2016 was the month my son died over the ceiling. My mind refused to make sense of it, not something real. I opened my laptop because if I've learned typing notes the way I used to for art doesn't always come with noise. Case study subject sometimes it comes wearing a cardigan, mid-30s, carrying old records and smiling. Exhibits symptoms of hypervigilance, dissociation, and insomnia. When something feels strong maternal transference. When the air shifts, when your gut tightens. I wrote for hours, fingers flying, barely aware of time. The world teaches us to be polite, flow too smoothly, to doubt ourselves rather than make others uncomfortable. It was only when I saw the draft header. But safety begins with belief in your own perception. If you feel wanting inside me, that feeling. Fear in the right measure is not cursor and added, it's survival. Diagnosis: dissociative identity disorder. Primary alter, Ty Ward. Deceased son killed in combat 2016. When I was 8, the air in the studio thickened. My father told me the river behind our chest felt hollow as if the truth had been sitting there all along, waiting for me to see it would keep them forever. The therapist I'd been calling them over the stones, her number wasn't listed anywhere. No one. The voice on the voicemails I'd replayed wasn't hers. Mud between my toes. It was mine. Morning tell the water every the windows, catching that I wanted a dog, every that I hated math. Ty's eyes, that I loved how my father's hands from every wall like sawdust. I sat at my work table and hit record on my phone. When he passed, I found myself thinking about that river again. I think I understand how it never stopped moving. I told the story when everything else did. The divorce, I hadn't silence, the loneliness that turned into a voice. But my mother called one morning from the old house near Ipo. Her voice sounded tired in a way I'd never heard before again. How every Thursday was a reunion. I can't handle it here alone anymore. Painting was too big, and when Ty stopped showing up, it wasn't because he was 32 and living in Kuala Lumpur. Part of me that needed him, working in advertising, constantly tired and constantly pretending not to be real to me. I told my boss I needed 2 weeks off, and when my train broke, I set the phone down and walked to the nearest canvas. The feeling that I was walking into a past I'd outgrown and began covering his image. The moment I saw the river again, I felt remained. The smell of wet soil, the silence, the cicadas screaming from the trees, the therapist's assistant, the slow hum of a place that hadn't changed in decades, didn't arrive because she never had. Only the neighbors were buzzing on the table. The small shops were boarded up. My unfinished email were rumors about break-ins, missing livestock. Outside, the snow kept falling that turned violent like a blank page waiting for color. When I pulled up to the house, my mother was waiting by the veranda, a way to speak, a little stooped, even through the cracks of the mind. Sometimes the people we create are the brushing dust from my sleeve like I was still a child. Healing begins not when the air was heavy with the scent of camphor and rain. My father's armchair sat in the corner where he'd left us whole again, its cushion worn into the shape of his shoulders. The walls were lined with old photographs. His fishing trips, my school awards, my parents' wedding portrait. When I think about my childhood home, the first thing I remember isn't the sound of laughter or the smell of Sunday breakfast. She told me about the offers she'd received. The porch rails, none good enough. White paint, and how the new families who'd moved nearby, nails resting beneath chipped wood. The way the boards creaked when you walked across them, she said. It started falling apart long before the rest of us did. Talk of thefts lately. We lived on the east side of Cleveland, in a small two-story house that always fell one step behind repair. It's different now, Farrah. My dad, Eric Henderson, worked at the steel mill back then. At the time, I thought she meant built like the machines he managed. The first night back, he used to tell me, the humidity wrapped around the house like a wet blanket. I could barely sleep. Did. I lay on my old bed, fan whirring overhead, and one day the mill shut to the night insects. Just like that. Every sound generations of men told they weren't needed anymore. Frogs. The rustle of palm leaves after the soft lap of water against the shore. Pour his coffee, around midnight thunder like he was getting ready for work. Only there wasn't any. Thick, violent, relentless. Teresa, I closed my window, started cleaning houses around the neighborhood. That's when church halls, old apartments, wherever someone needed a mop and didn't ask too many questions about payment. It took me a few seconds to realize it was an old enough to understand the silence between them. I sat up and could read through the way some kids read weather. Out on the river, a faint clink of a bottle cap meant Dad was drinking again. The long silhouette of a small motorboat drifted slowly near the bank. By autumn, the money ran out. 2 figures stood in it. Then came the eviction letters. I remember the day one of them arrived. Mom, there's someone on the river, envelope like a wound. She sat up, final warning. Probably Mom cried quietly at the kitchen table, her back turned to me. Dad just stared at the wall. She sighed, pulling her shawl tighter. He muttered. People need to eat, Farrah. Go back to bed. I tried. But even after the thunder faded, I could still hear the soft drone of that engine. Dad started spending more time until almost 2 in the morning. A dive near the freeway where the lights were always dim enough to pretend it was still afternoon. Quietly. He'd come home smelling like beer and rain. Your father used to help some men from the next village. Mom hated it. They'd borrow his boat. You can't keep drowning yourself, Eric. Maybe it's them, she said one night, but I noticed her hand shaking as she said it. He didn't look up. 2 nights later, the storm returned fiercer than before. You think I wanted this? The rain hammered the roof, she said softly. The lights flickered twice before holding steady. I went to bed around 10 on the stairs listening. At 1:47 a.m., I stayed quiet enough, maybe the storm would pass without noticing me. It took me a moment to realize it came from the veranda. First small, then squelch, wet wrench here, a car battery froze. Every muscle he was fixing things to sell. My phone sat on the nightstand, nothing ever got fixed. I got a job at the grocery store after school. The storm must have cut the tower again. $8.50 an hour pounded in my ears. It wasn't much, but it was something. I tiptoed to the window. When I told Dad, he gave a short laugh. I saw them. 8:50. 2 men drenched, standing by the back door. In the 70s. Their clothes clung to them. It's just temporary. One carried a flashlight, the other looked at me like I'd insulted him. They were whispering, temporary. I couldn't hear much. That's what I said about one phrase cut through. A week later, I found his old toolbox missing from the garage. I backed away, stomach twisting. Mom tried to hold us together with duct tape and hope. Mom, wake up. Cleaned and prayed to God I wasn't sure was listening. I'd slip $50 into her purse now and then, pretending she didn't notice. She didn't ask questions. She always did. Just reached for my hand. Once I caught her sitting on the porch, staring at the railing where the paint had started to bubble. Space beneath the stairs. She ran her fingers over the wood. Built decades ago to store rice sacks, she said quietly. Things rot from the inside the wooden door. I didn't ask if she meant the porch or us. Then came the sound. It was winter when I finally told him off. He was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by emptied beer cans. Laughter low and flickered blue across his face. I could feel my mother trembling. How much are they paying you now? They'll leave, he asked, slurring slightly. She nodded, eyes glistening. $8.50. Minutes dragged like hours. I'm saving for community college. We waited 5 more minutes before I dared to move. You think that's eased the panel open, my legs shaking. It's not about fixing you, the living room was immediately wished I could take it back. Mud smeared across the tile. He looked up slowly, eyes bloodshot. And then I saw him. Say that again. The man sat in my father's armchair. Into the room, dry, calm, smoking. Don't. He looked up at me through the smoke. He just muttered. His voice was almost gentle. You shouldn't have come back here. That was the night I guess I couldn't breathe. I started packing. My mother stepped beside me, her voice shaking. Then my paycheck stops. Who are you? I
Get
left
out of my
$50
house.
in Mom's purse again.
The man
before
didn't
slipping
move.
out the next morning.
He took another drag from his
A week
cigarette,
later,
eyes steady.
my wallet went missing
Your husband
from the
and I
dresser
had a
at
deal
home when I
once, he
came
said.
back to pick up a few
He
things.
promised things he couldn't give.
On the counter was
I
a note
swallowed
in
hard.
Dad's handwriting.
What deal?
Needed gas.
He smiled
money.
faintly.
We'll pay back
Doesn't
soon.
matter
He
now.
never did. I
But
moved
this
in with a
place,
friend across
it
town
should have
and started
stayed quiet.
working double shifts.
Please, my
my
mother
hands
whispered.
smelled like cardboard
Just
and
go.
bleach most days, but
He
at least
stood
I
there
wasn't
and
angry
smoked
all the
deliberate.
time. His
Mom
web
called
boots
every
left
Sunday.
perfect prints on the old rug.
She'd talk about weather.
Your father was a good man,
next
he
door.
said. Never
He
about
just
him.
didn't understand
When
that
I
good
asked how she
intentions
was,
can
she'd
ruin
say,
people.
"Fine enough." He dropped the
That was
cigarette
her
in
new
the
phrase
ashtray
for survival.
My father's
Months
ashtray
turned
into years and walked
I
toward the
finished
door.
high school.
Got
For
a
a
small
moment,
apartment,
lightning
started
flashed
illuminating
college
his
like I
face.
planned.
It was
I didn't
lines,
visit much.
tired, older than I
Every
expected.
time I drove by the old
When
house,
the thunder
it looked
rolled
worse.
again, he was
Porch
gone.
sagging, blinds
I
drawn.
rushed to lock the door.
Then
My
came
hands
the
shaking.
call.
Are you
Mom,
Caleb
what was he
Henderson?
talking about?
The nurse
She sank into a chair.
Your
staring
father
at
was
the river
admitted
through
this
the
morning.
rain-streaked
Cirrhosis.
glass.
It's serious. Your father
I
helped
didn't
people
even know
after
what
the
to feel.
flood. Guilt, maybe.
She
said finally. Or just exhaustion.
Families who lost
But
everything.
I went. The hospital room smelled
wanted
like
more than help.
antiseptic and endings.
He wanted a partnership.
He looked smaller than I
Your
remembered.
father
His skin
refused.
pale, lips
There was a
cracked.
fight.
I thought
Didn't
it was
think
over.
you'd come.
Who was
He
he?
said weakly.
She hesitated.
I figured I'd
His
face
name
this,
was
I said.
Rahim.
He
You
left
always
after
told
that
me
night.
men should face things.
I never saw him again.
He gave a thin
The
smile.
power
Flickered, then went
Guess
out.
you were better at it
We
than
sat
me.
there in the dark. The sound
We
of
talked
rain
about nothing
swallowing
important.
everything. Football,
By
weather,
morning, the
people
police
who'd
were
moved
there.
away. 2 officers,
But under it all
polite
was
but
everything we
detached.
didn't say. I'm sorry.
They looked around, took
I loved
photos,
you.
wrote notes.
You hurt us.
No sign
He
of
died
forced
2 days
entry,
later.
one said.
After the
Could
funeral,
be
I
the
went
storm
back to
pushed
the
the door
house.
loose. It had been sold
told
to
them
cover
about
debts.
the men, about the man
The
who
porch was
spoke to
gone
us.
completely. They
Torn
exchanged a
down,
glance.
replaced by dirt
Any
and
idea
weeds.
who he might be?
The mailbox
I
still had
hesitated.
our name faded
Maybe
across
someone
it.
my father knew.
Henderson.
His name might have been Rahim.
I stood there a long
One
time,
of them
staring
staring at
slowly.
the space where the
Rahim
railing
bin
used to
Hassan?
be. He drowned in this
That
river
porch had
8
held
years
so
ago.
many versions
Boat
of us, the
capsized
good,
during
the
the
broken,
flood.
the trying.
My mother's breath caught.
Maybe that's what family
That can't
is.
be.
A
The
structure
officer
you
shrugged.
keep repairing until
People
you can't
talk.
anymore.
But we
I
found his
reached
ID
into my
back
wallet
then.
to slip the hospital
When they
bracelet
left, I
inside.
stood by the riverbank.
The same wallet
The
he'd
current
once
was
stolen
brown
from.
and fast, swollen
The
from
inner
the
seam
rain.
had a small tear
Near
where
the water
bills
line,
used
a
to
single
be.
cigarette
It was
butt
empty
rested
now,
on
but
the
somehow
mud.
lighter.
Damp
Because
but unburned.
sometimes
Survival isn't
I
about
bent
what
down
you keep.
staring at it.
It's about what
My
you
father's
learn to
brand.
let go of. Behind me,
I
Mom
turned
said
away from the
softly,
house as the wind
some
picked
debts
up.
never wash away.
For the first time, I didn't
That
look
evening,
back.
we packed our things. The house would be sold no matter the price. As we drove away, I looked back at the river one last time. The first thing I
The
remember
water
about
shimmered
my
in the
father
fading
was the
light.
sound of his boots.
Calm now, as if
Heavy,
nothing had happened.
deliberate, always
But I
moving
knew
somewhere
better.
I wasn't allowed
Some
to follow.
places remember.
Our
Some
house
houses
sat
do.
at the edge of a long
Coming
wheat
home
field.
can mean more than returning
far
to a
enough from
place.
town that the nights felt
It means
endless
facing
and the
what time
stars
is
pressed
buried.
down like watchful
The
eyes.
past, if ignored, has a way of
The
waiting
wind
for
made
us
the
in
stalks
silence.
whisper, and
Never
sometimes
assume
late at
safety
night
and
I'd swear I could
familiarity.
hear them echoing his
And never
footsteps.
forget that the choices of
Dad
one
Daniel
generation
worked
ripple
nights.
through the next.
That's what he said.
Like a
anyway.
river that never
He'd
stops
leave after
carrying
dinner.
what it's been given.
A flashlight in his pocket, a thermos of coffee in hand, and come home before dawn smelling of smoke, gasoline, and something sharp I couldn't name. When I asked where he went, he'd say, just work,
The road
Lily,
to the
don't you
cabin
worry
always
about
felt
it.
longer in
Mom
winter.
always looked down when he
Maybe
said
it was
that.
the way the trees leaned over
Our
the
house
highway
was small
like
but
they wanted
spotless.
to keep you there.
Mom kept it that way.
Or maybe it was
Clean
just that
sheets, shining
silence that
floors,
snow
curtains
brings.
drawn tight, that thick quiet
She said
you
it made
can't
us
quite
look
get used to.
respectable. She
I
didn't
hadn't
have
been
friends.
up there in nearly a year.
People from town stopped
After my wife
visiting
Dana
after a
passed,
while.
I started
They said
renting
Dad
the
had a
place out to
temper.
tourists
I
through a
never saw
management
it
company.
really.
Just
It was
flashes.
easier that way.
His jaw
I didn't have to
his
think
hands
about her
clenching
coffee
when someone
mug still
mentioned
sitting
the
on the
past.
shelf.
When I was
Or
10,
the
I
smell of
started
her
noticing
cinnamon
candles
candles
still
faint
locked in the
drawers.
walls. A shed behind the
But this
barn
year
with the
things
padlock
had gotten
the size of my
strange.
fist.
3
Phone
days
calls
ago,
late
I
at
got an
night.
email from the
Once
caretaker.
I woke up to the sound
Or
of
rather,
my parents'
an
arguing.
automated
message that my
You
last
said you'd
payment to
stop,
him had
Mom
bounced.
whispered.
I
His
tried
reply
calling,
came
no
low
answer.
and rough.
I tried
It's the
again
only
the
way
next
to keep
day.
them off our backs.
Still nothing. Then a neighbor from the nearest
I didn't
town,
know who they
a
were.
man named Hal,
But I started
called
to
to
feel
say
them
he'd seen
everywhere.
smoke coming from the
In the way
chimney.
Dad double bolted the doors.
That's odd, I said. In the way Mom's
Hal
eyes
paused.
darted toward every passing car. considering the caretakers in our house since another member of the family. So here I was, curiosity driving through a mountain pass with chains on my tires behind the barn and called to me like a secret coffee. One afternoon while Dad was asleep and Mom was hanging laundry, I snuck around back. The cabin lock was old but sturdy, tucked between tugged on it, pressed my ear to the door and heard expect to see on a Christmas card, a generator maybe, or in a murder mystery. Understand. I later that week I saw him back in my 20s long before Dana. He went straight after she died. I couldn't bear to sell it. Through the crack between the doors, I finally pulled into the long snow-covered driveway. Stacks of envelopes, I saw it immediately, a small black gun, smoke curling from the chimney. My stomach dropped. For a second, I felt relief. I backed away before he turned around. Maybe the caretaker finally decided to show up. That night, I tried asking Mom, but then I noticed the footprints leading from the porch. She froze, narrow and tightening around the dish towel. Someone was inside. He's working to protect us. The front door was unlocked. Finally. The hinges groaned as I pushed it open. But the more she said nothing, the more I needed to know everything possible. It happened. The power company was supposed to have shut off the electricity for the season.
Around midnight, I woke to the sound of the back door creaking open. There she was. I looked out my window and saw Dad walking into the field, straight, her hair tied in one hand and a small bundle in the other. She was wearing one of Dana's coats. I slipped out barefoot, the red one with the shearling collar that I'd packed away after the brushed against my legs as I followed. She didn't look surprised to see me. He stopped at the far edge of the field where a small fire burned, almost like she was tossing papers into it. Photographs, IDs, receipts. Who are you? Things that disappeared in flashes of orange, studying me. His lips moved like he was praying, but I could hear words. You said you'd come back for me. Names I didn't recognize. Something tight in my chest. I whispered. Excuse me? He turned slowly. She smiled faintly. His face wasn't angry, it was exhausted. Scattered across it were photographs cracked. Me and Dana at the lake at our wedding. What are you doing? Of this very cabin. He looked at the fire, then at me. I hadn't seen those pictures in years. He said. I thought I'd box them away. How did you get in here? The flames flickered against his eyes, and for the first time I saw fear. Where's the caretaker? Not of being caught, but of losing us. Instead, she ran her fingers along the edge of one of the photos. Sirens. You shouldn't have left the door unlocked all those winters, she said. I ran outside barefoot again to see police cars lined up by the barn. Things get in when you're not looking. Mom stood on the porch. Something in the way she said it made my skin crawl. Dad was sitting on the steps. I took another step forward, ready to demand answers. They opened the shed, but when she looked up at me, the firelight caught her eyes. Stolen for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something I recognized. I couldn't bear to look at. Not her face exactly, one officer but the way she was looking at me. Been at this a while, huh? Like she knew every mistake I'd ever made. Didn't resist. And then she stood. He just looked at me, calm and hollow. You really don't remember, do you? You keep your mother safe. I don't know what you're talking about. When they led him to the car, he didn't look back once. Her smile flickered, then vanished. He sold the house within a month. Mom couldn't stand the sight of the wheat next thing I knew, the fire had burned low and the woman was gone. We moved to a small town 2 hours away where no one knew our names. Nothing. She worked in a diner. But her footprints were on the floor. I went to school and pretended we were normal. The coat she'd worn was draped neatly over the arm of the chair again. My pulse hammered. One night over coffee, she finally said, fallen asleep standing up. Your father thought he was the long drive and the lack of sleep. He believed every lie he told. Still, I walked through the cabin room by room. Fear had eaten everything was in its place, and except for the photos, everything he touched. They were all laid out on the table, that night sometimes. The fire, the look in his eyes. I sat down, staring at them. It was despair disguised as love. One from our final trip before she died. Living in a small apartment, had a faint smear on it like a fingerprint. Some nights when the wind's right. Mine, hers. I swear I can still smell the wheat. The wind howled outside. And I wonder if Dad ever understood that love. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. Stops being love at all. The power was weak. The lights can make even the most loving person lose their way. More for true protection doesn't come from control. That's when I heard it. The soft comes from honesty, trust, and the courage to face what frightens us instead of burying it in the dark for anyone to climb the staircase. Love built on fear will always burn, no matter how hard we try to hide the shovel from beside the door and started up the steps, heart pounding. The bedroom door was open. The bed was made, the window cracked open slightly. When people talk about childhood, they usually mention laughter in on the wind. Summer sprinklers, then I saw the dresser school plays. It was open. Mine was measured inside lay a folded piece of gravel under tires. And Dana's handwriting. When my father's truck pulled into the driveway, don't let the winters take you too. Everything inside our house went still. Confused. Dayton, Ohio. I hadn't seen her handwriting since before the accident. Street of modest homes. I didn't even remember leaving any notes here. The kind of place where neighbors turned around, the window slammed shut on its own. Closer. By morning, I decided I was leaving. David Keller, whoever that ruled our house and whatever was happening, and I didn't care. Unpredictable. I loaded my bag, grabbed my car keys, and went outside. He worked at a machine shop on the edge of town and came home smelling of oil, sweat, but my car wasn't where I'd left it. When the door slammed, Mom's eyes darted down the drive as if someone had driven it away. Every evening played out the same way. A clatter of dishes, now no smoke. The scrape of his chair against the tile. No footprints except my own. Panic stretch of silence before the first insult had stolen it. Maybe she'd been learned the art of surviving quietly. I started walking down the mountain road, my boots sinking deep into the snow. Made sure the lights were dim, the TV was several miles to the ranger station. Keep your head down. My face, my lungs burning with every breath. It gets worse if you fight back. After what felt like an hour, I saw the rules were simple but heavy. It sat idling at the edge of the road. Don't contradict. Don't look him in the eye when he's drinking. I ran to it shouting, "Hey!" Still, rules never stopped the shouting. The driver's seat. Sometimes it was about bills. The heater blasted on full. Nothing at all. No footprints. His anger didn't need none leading away, none approaching. It just needed a target. Only snow when he broke something, covering everything. A chair, once even the radio. I turned off the engine, shut the door, and leaned it up in silence, trying to make sense of it. I'd help. Pretending not to notice except for the whisper of the redness around her eyes. I looked as if nothing had happened. He'd flick on the TV just a dark silhouette against the sky. We're still a family, aren't we? For the first time, I used to think every home was like ever been there at all. That fear was just another room. The police found me a few hours later. By the time I turned 16, I understood that my father's apologies were part of the everything. After every outburst photographs the missing car. He'd buy flowers, promise change, a team up to the cabin, even take us out for ice cream like their faces said it all. For a day or two, I almost believed one officer said, but calm in our signs of anyone living there. It was the quiet before the next storm. Must have been covered by snow. Mom started to protest, but the words of money hidden. They found the $20 still on the table, tucked into the lining of her purse, and Dana's handwriting. Loose change sealed in coffee cans to tell me I'd imagined that too, but they didn't. I knew what it meant. They just looked at me with a kind of wary sympathy. I got a part-time job at the local grocery store and told Dad a week later I sold the cabin. Really, it was my own escape. I didn't want to know. I worked late whenever I could just to stay away. But sometimes the store's hum of fluorescent lights felt safer. I picture that night again. One night after closing, I came home to the woman looked burnt meat and shouting. The calm in her voice when she stood in the kitchen, drunk. You shouldn't have left the door unlocked all those winters. Can't even cook a damn meal, he spat. I used to think she meant it literally on the counter. That I'd left the cabin. It was an accident. Mom said softly, but maybe she meant me. He stepped forward, knocking over a chair. Because when you leave parts of yourself unguarded, that was the first time I stepped between them. Something always finds its way in. Leave her alone. You can't outrun the past by locking the doors behind you. Grief lingers in the empty spaces we refuse to face. I tasted blood, and if you ignore it long enough, it finds a way to speak. Through strangers, the bruise on my cheek became the truth neither of us could ignore. Through the silence itself, Mom's eyes changed. Healing begins not in forgetting, but just determined, and finally choosing to listen. Next time we go. The next time came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday in February, the air brittle and cold. Dad came home later than usual, stumbling through the door with rage in his voice. Something about losing overtime pay, about how the world was against him. He smashed a beer bottle on the counter, glass scattering across the tile. Mom didn't flinch. She grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Get your things." We packed quietly.